It began with a promise made under pressure, a promise that had to be kept no matter the cost. By late December of 1944, Bastogne was no longer just a town on a map. It was a symbol under siege. Snow-choked roads led nowhere. German armor pressed in from all sides. Inside the perimeter, American paratroopers were cold, low on ammunition, short on food, and surrounded. Every hour mattered. Every delay tightened the noose. And somewhere to the south, an armored division was being turned around in the middle of winter. The 4th Armored Division had not been preparing for this fight. It had been moving east. It had been advancing according to plan. And then the plan shattered. When the German Ardennes offensive erupted, everything changed. Orders came fast and without comfort. Turn north, move immediately. Push through terrain clogged with ice, traffic, and confusion. Reach Bastogne, or accept what its fall would mean. This was not a breakthrough planned in advance. It was a race against collapse. Roads were barely passable. Snow hid mines and wreckage alike. Columns backed up for miles as units scrambled to reposition. Fuel was precious. Visibility was poor. The enemy knew exactly which roads mattered and defended them accordingly. The 4th Armored did not move as a single spear. It moved in fragments. Combat commands pushed forward independently. Tanks advanced with infantry clinging close, knowing ambush waited beyond every tree line. German resistance was fierce and deliberate. Villages were turned into strongpoints. Roadblocks appeared suddenly. Anti-tank guns lay hidden beneath snow. Progress was slow, measured in miles that felt endless. Every engagement burned time the defenders of Bastogne did not have. Inside the pocket, the situation worsened by the hour. Shelling never stopped. Wounded men waited without shelter. Supplies ran dangerously low. Yet the defenders held, not knowing exactly when or if relief would come. All they had was the knowledge that somewhere beyond the snow, someone was trying. For the 4th Armored Division, the pressure was absolute. Failure meant more than losing ground. It meant losing men already holding the line. It meant surrender becoming inevitable. As the division pushed north, the fighting intensified. German units counterattacked aggressively. Sensing the danger, armor clashed at close range. Infantry fought house to house in frozen villages, whose names would soon be etched into memory. Tanks burned, crews dismounted, and fought on foot. Momentum stalled, and then surged again. The breakthrough did not come cleanly. It came through persistence, through refusing to stop, through attacking again after being repulsed, through commanders pushing units forward even when maps no longer made sense. At Assenois, after days of brutal advance, the final barrier cracked. American tanks punched through German defenses and rolled toward Bastogne. When the lead elements finally made contact with the surrounded garrison, it was not a dramatic charge. It was a moment of exhaustion. Men who had been surrounded for days saw tanks appear through the snow. Supplies followed. Evacuation became possible. The siege was broken. Not ended, but broken. Bastogne would still be fought over, but it would not fall. The Relief of Bastogne did not win the Battle of the Bulge by itself, but it changed its direction. It shattered the German timetable. It restored Allied confidence. It proved that the offensive could be stopped and reversed. The 4th Armored Division's breakthrough stands as one of the most determined advances of the war. Not because it was elegant, but because it happened under the worst possible conditions, against an enemy who knew exactly what was at stake. Tonight, we return to that frozen road north, to the tanks pushing through snow and fire, to the promise kept under impossible pressure, to the moment when relief arrived just in time. And before we continue, if you're still here, listening closely, if these long, quiet journeys through history help you slow down, focus, or escape the noise of the day, then I hope you'll consider subscribing. I'm a small creator, building this space one story at a time, carefully, patiently, and with respect for the people who live these moments. Subscribing doesn't just support the channel, it tells me these stories matter to you too. If this kind of storytelling gives you something calm, perspective, or simply a place to rest your thoughts, then stay with me. Settle in. This is the story of Bastogne's relief, and the 4th Armored Divisions race against time. December 16, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The Ardennes forest explodes. Along an 85-mile front stretching through Belgium and Luxembourg, German artillery tears the winter darkness apart. American soldiers, many of them green replacements who arrived just weeks earlier, stumble from their foxholes into chaos. The barrage is unlike anything the Western Front has seen since D-Day. Trees shatter into splinters. The frozen ground heaves upward, and in the valleys below, engines roar. Hundreds of engines. Thousands. A sound that shouldn't exist here, in this quiet sector, in this forgotten forest where divisions came to rest. The 8th Corps holds this line with 83,000 men spread impossibly thin across those 85 miles. They were told this was a quiet sector, a place to recover, to integrate replacements, to catch your breath before the spring offensives that everyone knew were coming. Instead, in the pre-dawn blackness, they faced 200,000 German soldiers pouring through gaps that open like wounds. Entire battalions simply vanish in the first hours. Radio networks go silent. Command posts are overrun before officers can burn their maps. By noon on the 16th, American commanders 60 miles behind the front still don't understand what's happening. They have reports, conflicting reports, impossible reports. German armor, where no German armor should exist. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force receives the first coherent picture on December 17th. What emerges is terrifying in its scope and precision. This isn't a local counterattack. This isn't a spoiling action. This is Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last great gamble in the West, and it's working. 3 German armies, the 5th Panzer Army, 6th Panzer Army, and 7th Army, are driving west toward the Meuse River. Their objective, captured documents will later reveal, is Antwerp. If they reach it, they'll split the Allied armies in two, trap the British in the north, and buy Germany the months it needs to rebuild. Or so Hitler believes. The offensive caught Allied intelligence completely by surprise, a failure that will haunt careers and fill after-action reports for years. December 18th. The crisis crystallizes around a single word that appears in situation reports with increasing frequency: Bastogne. It's a market town in southern Belgium. Population 4,000. Notable for exactly one thing: 7 major roads converge there like spokes on a wheel. Control Bastogne and you control movement through the Ardennes. Lose Bastogne and the German armor can flow west unimpeded. American commanders, scrambling to make sense of the chaos, realize this simultaneously with their German counterparts. Both sides begin a race. The Americans are sending the 101st Airborne Division, elite troops pulled from reserve in France. The Germans are sending everything they can spare from the breakthrough units. Whoever reaches Bastogne first will decide what happens next. General Dwight Eisenhower calls an emergency conference at Verdun on December 19th. The room is cold. The mood is colder. His senior commanders gather around maps that show German penetrations 30 miles deep in places. Some units are encircled. Others are in full retreat. The situation along the northern shoulder is particularly bad, where the 6th Panzer Army is grinding forward despite heavy resistance. But it's the southern penetration that worries Eisenhower most. That's where the 5th Panzer Army is moving fastest, and that's where Bastogne sits. He turns to General George Patton, commander of the 3rd Army to the south, currently engaged in completely different operations near the German border. Eisenhower asks a question that sounds impossible. When can you attack north? Patton's answer stuns the room. December 22nd. With 3 divisions. Everyone knows what this means. Patton's 3rd Army would have to disengage from its current offensive, turn 90 degrees, and attack into the southern flank of the German penetration, in winter, across unfamiliar ground, in 72 hours. Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, Bedell Smith, later writes that he didn't believe Patton could do it. Neither did the British commanders present. But they're out of options. The plan is approved immediately. 3rd Army will pivot north, and leading that pivot will be the 4th Armored Division. The 4th Armored Division, positioned near Saarbrücken, 150 miles south of Bastogne, receives warning orders on December 18th. They're told to prepare to move. Destination unknown, mission unknown. Just be ready. The men loading the tanks and half-tracks don't know they're about to attempt something unprecedented in modern warfare. They don't know their division has been chosen because it has a reputation for doing impossible things quickly. They don't know that in 4 days they'll be fighting for every mile toward a town most of them can't pronounce. They just know they're moving north, toward the sound of the guns. December 20th, Bastogne is surrounded. The 101st Airborne and attached units, roughly 18,000 men, are now cut off with limited supplies and winter closing in. German forces probe the perimeter looking for weak points. Inside the town, officers take inventory. Food for maybe 10 days at full rations, less if they have to stretch it. Artillery ammunition for 3 to 4 days of heavy fighting. Medical supplies already running low with hundreds of wounded from the chaotic retreat. The weather is overcast, which means no aerial resupply. Every man in Bastogne understands the mathematics of siege. Time is the enemy now, as much as the German divisions surrounding them. 200,000 German soldiers against 83,000 Americans. A surprise offensive that shattered the front. A town surrounded and running out of time, and somewhere to the south, an armored division preparing for a 150-mile road march through ice and snow toward a battle that hasn't started yet. The question hanging over every headquarters from Eisenhower's in Versailles to Patton's in Luxembourg is brutally simple. Can one division make a difference? Can speed and aggression overcome the numbers? Can Bastogne hold long enough for relief to arrive? The answer depends on 22 miles. That's the distance from the 4th Armored Division's jump-off point near Arlon to the southern edge of Bastogne's perimeter. 22 miles through rolling hills and stone villages. 22 miles against prepared German defenses. 22 miles that will become the most contested ground in Europe. Because if the 4th Armored fails, if they can't cover those 22 miles in time, then Bastogne falls. And if Bastogne falls, the German breakthrough continues. And if the breakthrough continues, then everything changes. The war might extend into summer. Casualties mount. The political situation shifts. Hitler gets his miracle. So everything, absolutely everything, comes down to whether American armor can do in winter what it struggled to do in summer. Whether they can break through, not around, but through prepared defenses. Whether they can sustain the attack despite casualties. Whether 22 miles is possible in the time remaining. The clock is already running. July 17, 1944, St. Lô, France. The breakthrough everyone's been waiting for. For 6 weeks after D-Day, Allied forces clawed forward through the Norman hedgerows at horrific cost, gaining miles measured in hundreds of yards. The Bocage country, with its ancient earthen banks and dense vegetation, turned every field into a fortress. Sherman tanks burned in lanes too narrow to maneuver. Infantry companies lost half their strength taking villages they couldn't pronounce. Then came Operation Cobra, Bradley's plan to punch through the German line with concentrated force. And when the breakthrough came, when the German defenses finally cracked, Patton unleashed his armor. Leading the exploitation was a division with a peculiar reputation. They didn't clear ground methodically. They didn't worry about their flanks. They just moved fast. The 4th Armored Division earned its nickname, Hell on Wheels, by doing what armored divisions were theoretically designed for but rarely accomplished. Sustained, rapid, deep penetration of enemy lines. Created in April 1941 at Pine Camp, New York, the division trained for 3 years before seeing combat. 3 years to develop the doctrine, the cohesion, the almost telepathic understanding between tank crews and infantry squads that makes combined arms warfare work. When they landed in France in July 1944, they were as ready as any division could be. What they did next surprised even Patton, and Patton was hard to surprise. August 1944. The race across France. The 4th Armored covers 600 miles in 30 days, a pace that leaves supply officers tearing their hair out, and German commanders unable to establish coherent defensive lines. They liberate town after town so quickly that French civilians don't have time to prepare celebrations before American tanks are already disappearing toward the next objective. The secret is their organization. American armored divisions use a flexible system called combat commands. 3 semi-independent task forces designated CCA, CCB, and CCR for reserve. Each combines tanks, armored infantry, artillery, and engineers into a balanced force that can fight independently. While other divisions move as a single mass, the 4th Armored flows like water, going around obstacles, exploiting gaps, never stopping long enough for the enemy to organize a coherent response. The division's structure reflects American industrial thinking applied to warfare. 3 tank battalions, each with 53 Sherman tanks on paper. Though combat attrition means they rarely field more than 40 operational, 3 armored infantry battalions riding in M3 half-tracks, able to keep pace with the tanks and dismount when terrain or resistance demands it. 3 battalions of self-propelled artillery, M7 priests with 105mm howitzers that can move with the combat commands and deliver fire support within minutes of a call. Add engineers, reconnaissance, tank destroyers, anti-aircraft units, and all the support echelons, and you have 11,000 men and roughly 250 armored vehicles, but the real strength isn't the equipment list, it's the men commanding it. September 15, 1944, the 4th Armored crosses into Germany near Trier, becoming the first Allied unit to reach German soil. This accomplishment barely makes the newspapers because everyone's focused on Market Garden in the north. Montgomery's airborne operation that promises to end the war by Christmas. But for the tankers and infantry of the 4th Armored, crossing the border represents something profound. They've come from Normandy to the Rhine in 60 days. They've liberated hundreds of French towns. They've destroyed dozens of German units. And they've done it with a casualty rate lower than divisions that moved more cautiously, a fact that validates their aggressive doctrine. Speed, they learned, saves lives. Hesitation kills. The commanders who made this possible form a chain of aggressive personalities that Patton personally selected. Major General John Wood commanded through the breakout, a hard-driving armor theorist who believed tanks should exploit, not assault. Under him, brigadiers and colonels like Bruce Clark and Albin Irzik led the combat commands with a mix of tactical brilliance and sheer audacity that sometimes terrified their own staff officers. And at the battalion level, young lieutenant colonels in their 30s commanded the tank battalions. One name appears repeatedly in after-action reports from this period: Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, known for leading from the front and never, ever stopping when momentum was possible. November 1944. The advance grinds to a halt in the Saar region near the German border. After months of spectacular gains, the 4th Armored finds itself in the kind of fighting armor hates, attacking prepared fortifications in terrible weather with supply lines stretched to breaking. The Siegfried Line, Germany's western defensive barrier, proves that concrete and determined defenders can stop even the best armored divisions. Casualties mount, tank losses increase. The euphoria of the summer pursuit fades into the grim reality of winter warfare. By early December, the division is exhausted, under strength, and ready for relief. December 1st. Major General Hugh Gaffey assumes command, replacing John Wood in a change that raises eyebrows throughout 3rd Army. Wood was beloved by his subordinates, respected by his peers, and his relief, for reasons never fully explained, damages morale. Gaffey is capable, experienced, and well-regarded, but he's not Wood, and he takes command just as the division needs rest it won't receive. Within 2 weeks of assuming command, Gaffey will face the greatest challenge of his career. The question hovering unspoken in the division's headquarters is whether a new commander, still learning his unit, can lead them through what's coming. By mid-December, the 4th Armored's combat record stands unmatched in 3rd Army. 4,000 casualties since Normandy, but they've covered more ground, liberated more towns, and destroyed more enemy units than any comparable formation. Their Sherman tanks are worn, their tracks are loose, their crews are tired, but the division has developed something intangible, something you can't create through training or equipment. They believe they can accomplish any mission. They believe no obstacle is permanent. They believe that if you keep moving, keep attacking, keep pushing, eventually something breaks. This belief, this organizational arrogance born from 5 months of validated success, will be tested against 22 miles of German defenses in winter. And everything, the division's reputation, their commander's career, the fate of Bastogne, depends on whether that belief survives contact with reality. The 4th Armored Division, in December 1944, is simultaneously at its peak and its breaking point. Peak effectiveness, because every lesson from Normandy to the Saar has been learned, integrated and internalized. Breaking point because men and machines can only sustain combat operations for so long before something gives. When the orders come on December 18th to prepare for movement north, the division responds with practiced efficiency. But the maintenance officers know the truth. Half their tanks need major repairs. The supply officers know they're short on winter clothing and ammunition. The medical officers know they're dealing with more combat exhaustion cases than usual. And the junior officers, the captains and lieutenants who lead platoons and companies, know what everyone knows but nobody says. They're about to be asked to do something harder than anything they've done before. Because this time, they're not exploiting a breakthrough. This time, they have to create one. December 18th, 10 o'clock at night. 3rd Army Headquarters, Luxembourg City. The operations section is chaos. Maps cover every horizontal surface. Radio operators shout grid coordinates over static-filled networks. Staff officers huddle around situation reports that contradict each other from paragraph to paragraph. And in the center of this controlled pandemonium, General George Patton presides with the focused energy of a man who's been preparing for this moment since December 12th, 4 days before the German offensive even began. Because while Allied intelligence failed to predict the bulge, Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oskar Koch, noticed something troubling in early December: German radio traffic patterns changing, reconnaissance activity increasing, and fresh divisions moving into quiet sectors. Koch told Patton the Germans might attack north through the Ardennes. Patton, trusting his intelligence officer over the optimistic assessments from higher headquarters, ordered his staff to plan for an emergency pivot. The plan sitting on Patton's desk when Eisenhower's call comes isn't sketched on a napkin. It's detailed, rehearsed, and ready to execute. 3 roads designated red, white, and blue will carry 3rd Army's divisions north. Highway regulation points, essentially military police armed with maps and authority, will control every major intersection. Artillery units will displace first to provide fire support soonest. Tank destroyers will screen the flanks. And leading the entire movement, racing ahead to engage the enemy as quickly as possible, will be the 4th Armored Division. The plan is brilliant in its simplicity and staggering in its complexity. Moving an entire army 90 degrees requires choreography that would challenge a logistics computer, except it's 1944 and they're doing it with paper, radio, and sheer organizational competence. December 19th. The movement begins. 133,178 vehicles start rolling north across 3 parallel road networks. Imagine trying to move the population of a medium-sized city, plus all their equipment, across icy roads in winter while enemy aircraft strafe anything that moves. Now imagine doing it in 72 hours with no major traffic jams, collisions, or breakdowns that halt the entire column. This is what 3rd Army accomplishes between December 19th and December 22nd. The military police at the intersections become the unsung heroes of the operation, directing traffic with the precision of orchestra conductors, ensuring that artillery doesn't get stuck behind supply trucks, that infantry doesn't end up separated from their supporting armor. The 4th Armored Division's convoy stretches for miles. 53-ton Sherman tanks on tank transporters, saving their tracks for combat. Half-tracks carrying the armored infantry. Artillery pieces towed by M5 tractors, tank destroyers, anti-aircraft vehicles, supply trucks loaded with ammunition, rations, fuel, and the 1,000 other items an armored division needs to fight, and fuel trucks, endless fuel trucks. Because Sherman tanks, with their gasoline engines and poor fuel economy, drink petrol like a drunk sailor on shore leave. Each tank needs 200 gallons to travel 100 miles. The division has roughly 200 armored vehicles. The mathematics is brutal. 75,000 gallons minimum, just to move the division from Saarbrücken to Arlon, and that's before firing a shot. The logistics operation supporting this movement represents American industrial and organizational capability at its finest. Fuel dumps are being established along the route before the combat units even arrive. Ammunition supply points position themselves based on predicted consumption rates calculated from previous battles. Medical clearing stations move forward to positions where they can receive casualties within the golden hour. Maintenance companies prepare to establish field repair facilities, and buried in the planning documents is a telling detail. The planners expect heavy tank losses and have already allocated replacement Shermans to be delivered to the division within 48 hours of commencement of operations. They're not hoping for success. They're planning for a meat grinder. December 20th. The convoy continues through weather that's trying to kill them. Temperatures hover between 20 and 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Roads ice over. Visibility drops to near zero in some areas when fog settles into the valleys. Vehicles slide off roads. Minor collisions ripple through convoys. And yet the movement continues with remarkable efficiency, because every unit from battalion level up has a detailed movement table specifying exactly when they should reach each checkpoint. If a unit is late, the military police know it immediately and can route traffic around them. If a unit is early, they're held at assembly areas to prevent congestion ahead. The entire operation runs on a timetable as precise as a railroad, except this railroad stretches for over 100 miles and consists of tanks. The weather on December 20th is miserable, but it provides one crucial advantage. Low cloud cover means German aircraft can't operate effectively. The Luftwaffe, though a shadow of its former strength, still has enough fighters and ground attack aircraft to make daylight movement suicidal if the weather clears. Allied fighter bombers, the P-47s that have dominated the skies since Normandy, are similarly grounded, so the movement happens in a kind of weather-imposed truce where both sides relocate forces without aerial interference. This won't last. The meteorologists are predicting clearing conditions by December 23rd. When that happens, the nature of the battle changes completely. Communication during the movement is a constant challenge. Radio networks, already strained by the chaos of the German offensive, now have to handle Third Army's divisions displacing across a 100-mile front. Wire teams string telephone lines behind the advancing columns, but the lines break as vehicles run over them. Messengers on motorcycles roar between units carrying written orders when radio proves unreliable. And at every level, commanders make decisions based on incomplete information, best guesses, and aggressive interpretation of Patton's intent, which is always the same: move faster, attack sooner, don't wait for perfect conditions. December 21st. The 4th Armored approaches its assembly area near Arlon, roughly 22 miles south of Bastogne. They've covered 150 miles in 48 hours, a movement that would be impressive in peacetime and is nearly miraculous given the conditions. But the cost is already visible. Tanks have thrown tracks from the road march. Vehicles have broken down and been left for the maintenance units trailing behind. Men are exhausted from days without real sleep, sustained only by coffee and the nervous energy that comes before major combat. The division's maintenance officers conduct hasty inspections and discover what they feared. Roughly 20% of their tanks need repairs before they're combat ready. They have hours, not days, to fix them. December 22nd, dawn. The 4th Armored Division is in position. Patton's promise to Eisenhower, delivered with such confidence at Verdun 3 days earlier, has been kept. 3 divisions of 3rd Army are ready to attack north into the German penetration. The 90-degree pivot, accomplished in 72 hours across 150 miles in winter, will be studied in military staff colleges for generations as an example of operational art at its finest. But for the 11,000 men of the 4th Armored, the road march is just the beginning. Ahead lies Bastogne, surrounded and running out of time. Between the 4th Armored and Bastogne lie 22 miles defended by German troops who know exactly where the relief effort must come from. The real test isn't the movement, it's what comes next, and what comes next is going to cost everything they have. December 22nd, 6 o'clock in the morning. The attack jumps off in darkness. Combat Command A advances on the right. Combat Command B on the left. Each is a balanced task force of roughly 3,500 men, with tanks, infantry, artillery, and engineers. The plan is simple: attack north along parallel routes, clear the German defenses, and link up with Bastogne's perimeter 22 miles away. Staff officers at 3rd Army headquarters, planning this operation around maps and intelligence estimates, calculate the advance should take 2 days, maybe 3, if resistance is heavy. They're professionals, they're experienced, and they're catastrophically wrong, because they're planning against a map, and the 4th Armored is attacking against German paratroopers who have turned every village into a fortress. First objective: Martelange, 8 miles north of the jump-off point. A small town on the Cher River where a stone bridge offers the only viable crossing for armor. Should be in American hands by noon. Instead, it takes all day. German troops of the 5th Parachute Division hold the high ground on the north bank with mortars, machine guns, and Panzerfausts, the disposable anti-tank weapons that can kill a Sherman at close range. American infantry dismounts and assaults across the bridge, under covering fire from the tanks. The Germans fall back to the next defensive line. The pattern establishes itself immediately. Attack, clear, reorganize, attack again. Each village costs time, each ridge costs casualties, and the math is merciless. 8 miles in 12 hours means 16 hours for 22 miles, except the resistance is getting stronger, not weaker. December 23rd. Weather clears. For the first time since the offensive began, pilots on both sides can fly. American P-47 Thunderbolts appear over the 4th Armored's columns, providing close air support that's been desperately needed. But clear skies cut both ways. Now the Germans can see American movements. Now their artillery observers on the ridges can direct accurate fire onto the roads. And now everyone understands the terrain problem that will define this entire operation. The route to Bastogne passes through rolling hills cut by stream valleys, each of which requires a bridge or ford. The roads between valleys follow ridgelines that offer no cover, and every village built of stone by farmers centuries ago provides ready-made defensive positions. The German defenders aren't elite panzer divisions. They're the 5th Parachute Division, which despite its name is fighting as infantry by December 1944. But they're experienced, well-led, and fighting from prepared positions with clear fields of fire. Behind them, supporting them, are elements of Panzer Lehr, a division that earned a fearsome reputation in Normandy. And moving into position to block the American advance are units of the Führer Grenadier Brigade, fanatical troops whose name tells you everything about their motivation. The 4th Armored isn't facing a thin screen of delaying forces, they're facing a deliberate defense in depth. December 23rd, evening. After 2 full days of continuous attack, the 4th Armored has advanced 10 miles. They're halfway to Bastogne. At this rate, they'll arrive in another 4 days, minimum. Inside Bastogne, the garrison has food for maybe a week, ammunition for a few days of heavy fighting. The mathematics don't work. Everyone from Patton down to the tank commanders understands. The current pace isn't fast enough. Something has to change. But what? They're already attacking aggressively. They're already accepting casualties that would cause other divisions to pause and reorganize. They're already pushing their men and machines beyond normal operational limits. What more can possibly be done? The fighting develops a brutal rhythm. Dawn artillery preparation to suppress German positions. Sunrise. Tanks and infantry advance until contact. Morning. Methodical clearing of whatever village blocks the route. Noon. Reorganization. Casualty evacuation. Fuel and ammunition resupply. Afternoon. Repeat. Night. German infiltration attacks. American perimeter defense. Everyone exhausted and cold, and waiting for dawn to start again. The advances are measured in hundreds of yards. Each village name becomes seared into the division's memory. Bernen, Hollange, Warnock, places nobody's heard of, become shorthand for particular flavors of hell. The terrain favors defense so completely that German forces can delay the American advance with relatively small units. A reinforced company, 200 men with mortars and anti-tank guns positioned on a ridge, can hold for hours against a battalion. Even when they're finally forced to retreat, they fall back to the next prepared position and do it again. The 4th Armored's tank crews learn to hate the landscape. The narrow roads confine them to predictable routes. The open fields between roads are muddy, making off-road movement slow and exhausting. And everywhere, the hedgerows and stone walls that seemed quaint in summer provide perfect concealment for German anti-tank teams with Panzerfausts. December 24th, Christmas Eve. After 3 days of attacking, the division is still 12 miles from Bastogne. The casualty reports make grim reading. 50 tanks damaged or destroyed, though maintenance crews are working miracles to repair and return them to action. 300 casualties, killed and wounded, with more from frostbite and combat exhaustion, and the supply situation is becoming critical. Fuel consumption exceeds predictions because the constant starting, stopping, and maneuvering in combat burns more gasoline than road marches. Ammunition expenditure runs high because every obstacle requires preparation fires. The logisticians, working frantically to keep the combat units supplied, perform their own kind of miracle, but there are limits even to what good logistics can accomplish. That night, a radio intercept provides a moment of dark humor that spreads through the division like wildfire. The Germans had sent a surrender demand to Bastogne, and the American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe of the 101st Airborne, replied with a single word: nuts. The response perfectly captures the defiant spirit of the surrounded garrison. It also confirms what everyone in the 4th Armored already knows. Bastogne is still holding, still fighting, still waiting for relief. The pressure on the advancing division intensifies. They're not just trying to break through anymore. They're racing against time, against dwindling supplies, against the mathematics of siege that say every day that passes makes the relief more critical and more difficult. The pattern of advance continues into Christmas Eve. Attack, clear, reorganize, attack again. But now there's an edge of desperation to the operations. Commanders push harder. Risks that would have been unacceptable 3 days ago become standard practice. Units bypass some German positions rather than clearing them completely, leaving enemy forces in their rear. The focus narrows to a single objective: reach Bastogne, regardless of cost, regardless of consequences. Because if the 4th Armored doesn't break through, nobody else will. 22 miles. Such a short distance on a map, an impossible distance on the ground. And with 12 miles remaining and time running out, the division faces a fundamental question. Can conventional tactics, no matter how aggressively applied, achieve what's needed? Or does the relief of Bastogne require something more radical? December 25th, dawn. Christmas morning. The attack has stalled. For 3 days, combat commands A and B hammered at the German defenses with methodical, by-the-book assaults that cleared villages and advanced the line but consumed time. The garrison in Bastogne doesn't have. Major General Hugh Gaffey, commanding the 4th Armored, understands he needs a different approach. The conventional method isn't working fast enough, so he shifts his strategy, moving Combat Command Reserve, the CCR, into the lead. And commanding CCR's spearhead, the unit that will make the main effort, is a 30-year-old lieutenant colonel who's about to become the most important officer in 3rd Army. His name is Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., and he's about to break every rule in the Armor Tactics Manual. Abrams graduated from West Point in 1936, the same class that produced Creighton Walker and William Westmoreland, officers who will shape the Army for the next 30 years. But in December 1944, he's just a lieutenant colonel commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, 53 Sherman tanks, and 700 men who have followed him since Normandy. His reputation precedes him: aggressive to the point of recklessness, leads from the front, often commanding from the lead tank where he can see the battlefield directly, impatient with caution, contemptuous of hesitation, and absolutely convinced that momentum is everything in armored warfare. His crews worship him because he never asks them to do anything he won't do first. The mission Gaffey gives CCR is simple to state and nearly impossible to execute. Break through to Bastogne. Not methodically advance. Not carefully clear each village. Break through. Punch through the German defenses. Bypass strong points. Leave the infantry to mop up behind, and get armor into Bastogne before the garrison collapses. It's the kind of mission armor theorists write about and practical soldiers avoid because the risks are extraordinary. Armored columns without infantry support are vulnerable to close-range attack. Bypassing enemy strongpoints means leaving hostile forces in your rear, threatening your supply line, and attacking without thorough reconnaissance means driving blind into unknown defenses. Abrams receives the order and immediately begins planning how to do exactly that. December 25th, 10 o'clock in the morning. Abrams gathers his company commanders for a tactical conference. These are captains in their mid-20s, most of them, who have learned their trade in the brutal school of combat since July. He shows them the map. The road to Bastogne runs through a series of villages: Remis-Champagne, Chaumont, Bigonville, Assenois, and then the final mile into Bastogne's perimeter. Intelligence reports German forces in each village, But intelligence doesn't know the strength or exact dispositions. Conventional doctrine says to conduct reconnaissance, develop the situation, attack with combined arms. Abrams says they're going to do something different. They're going to attack at speed, firing on the move, overwhelming German positions before defenders can react effectively, and they're not stopping. Not for anything short of absolute mechanical failure or catastrophic casualties. The plan violates several fundamental principles of armored warfare. Tanks are supposed to provide a base of fire for infantry to maneuver. Instead, Abrams proposes putting infantry on the tanks where they can dismount instantly when needed, but otherwise keep pace with the armor. Attacks are supposed to be carefully coordinated with artillery preparation. Instead, Abrams wants to move so fast that artillery can't keep up, relying on the tank's own guns and surprise to suppress defenders. And tank battalions are supposed to maintain formation, keeping mutual support distance between vehicles. Instead, Abrams plans to lead with a narrow column that can exploit any gap immediately. It's either brilliant or suicidal. His company commanders, looking at the map and doing the mental mathematics of combat, suspect it's both. Abrams conducts personal reconnaissance that afternoon, something battalion commanders rarely do because the risk is unjustifiable. He takes a jeep forward to the current front lines and spends hours studying the terrain through binoculars. What he sees confirms his plan. The German defenses are strong at the villages, but thin between them. There are gaps, dead spaces where American armor can move without being observed from the German strongpoints. The terrain is broken, which makes movement difficult, but also provides concealment. And most importantly, Abrams spots something the intelligence reports missed: a route that bypasses Warnock, the most heavily defended village in the path, by swinging east through Bougainville. It's longer, but it avoids the strongest defenses. Sometimes the fastest route isn't the shortest one. That evening, Abrams issues his operations order to the battalion. They'll depart at 0300 on December 26th, moving in darkness to achieve surprise. The 37th Tank Battalion will lead, followed immediately by Company C of the 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion mounted on the tanks. They'll move fast, shoot fast, and stop for nothing. Villages will be bypassed unless they directly block the route. German positions that can be suppressed rather than destroyed will be suppressed, and if the column gets separated, if individual units lose contact, they're to continue toward Bastogne independently. The objective is the relief of the garrison. Everything else is secondary. It's the kind of order that makes staff officers nervous and combat leaders eager. The risks are acknowledged but accepted. If the column is cut off, if the Germans counterattack in strength against the supply line, the relief force could be destroyed. If German anti-tank guns are positioned where Abrams doesn't expect them, the lead tanks will burn before they can react. If the infantry can't keep up, the tanks will be vulnerable to German soldiers with Panzerfausts. And if any of a dozen other things go wrong, this relief operation becomes a disaster that costs a battalion and doesn't save Bastogne. But if it works, if speed and aggression can do what methodical tactics couldn't, then the relief succeeds, and an entire garrison is saved. Abrams, planning through the night of Christmas Day, bets everything on that if. The transformation and tactical approach from the first 3 days to what Abrams proposes is profound. The early attacks treated the advance to Bastogne as a linear problem. Clear each obstacle sequentially until you reach the objective. Abrams reconceptualizes it as a penetration problem. Find a weak point, exploit it with maximum violence, and drive deep before the defense can react. It's classic blitzkrieg doctrine applied by Americans, using American equipment, against Germans defending prepared positions. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Germany invented this style of warfare. Now an American is about to use it against them, betting that superior logistics and industrial capacity can sustain an aggressive operational approach that German armies, starved of fuel and replacements, can no longer execute. December 26th, 0300, complete darkness. Temperature below freezing. Abrams' column forms up in the assembly area near Champagne. 53 tanks, theoretically, though mechanical issues have reduced the actual number to about 40 operational Shermans. 200 infantry from Company C, 53rd Armored Infantry, distributed among the tanks with orders to ride until contact and then dismount fighting. Artillery is on call, but will likely fall behind once the advance begins. And at the front of the column, in the lead tank, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams occupies the tank commander's position where he can control the battle directly. It's poor practice for a battalion commander. It's also the only way Abrams operates. At 0300 exactly, the column begins rolling north. The Relief of Bastogne's final phase has begun. December 26th, 4 o'clock in the morning. The column moves through darkness like a mechanical serpent. Abrams's tanks roll out of Remy-Champagne with infantry clinging to the engine decks, a technique the Russians pioneered and the Americans adopted because it works. The infantry stay warm from the engine heat. They can dismount in seconds when needed, and the tanks don't have to slow down waiting for infantry and half-tracks to catch up. It's brutally uncomfortable and dangerous, but speed matters more than comfort. The column moves without lights, drivers navigating by compass and memory of the reconnaissance, each tank following the one ahead by watching for its faint exhaust glow. Radio silence, no stopping. The element of surprise is their only advantage, and surprise evaporates the moment the Germans detect them. 6 o'clock. First light. The lead tanks approach Chaumont, a village of perhaps 50 buildings that sits astride the most direct route to Bastogne. Intelligence reports German forces there, but the specifics are unclear. Could be a reinforced company, could be a battalion, could be armor. The uncertainty would normally dictate caution. Maybe an artillery preparation, definitely a reconnaissance in force before committing the main body. Abrams orders direct assault. The artillery, racing to keep up with the advance, has exactly 15 minutes to fire a preparation. Then the tanks are going in, ready or not. The assault on Chaumont begins at 0630, with every American artillery piece within range firing for effect. 105mm howitzers drop high explosive onto the village. 155mm guns fire from further back, longer range but heavier shells. The town disappears into smoke and flame. Civilians, if any remain, are sheltering in cellars, praying the stone walls hold. German defenders crouch in foxholes and prepared positions, heads down waiting for the barrage to lift because they know what comes next. And at 0645, exactly 15 minutes after it began, the artillery shifts to targets north of the town. The tanks advance immediately. Marching fire. That's the tactical term for tanks advancing while shooting, suppressing rather than destroying targets, maintaining momentum above all else. The Shermans of the 37th Tank Battalion execute it perfectly because they've practiced this since Normandy. 75mm main guns firing high explosive into buildings where Germans might be positioned. Coaxial 30 caliber machine guns hosing windows and doorways. The bow gunners 30 caliber adding to the volume of fire. Each tank is a mobile fortress pouring fire forward, and there are 40 of them advancing in a column that stretches back hundreds of yards. The sound is apocalyptic. The visual effect for the German defenders watching 40 tanks emerge from the smoke of the artillery barrage is paralyzing. But the Germans in Chaumont are veterans of the 5th Parachute Division, and veterans don't panic easily. They let the lead tanks close to within 500 yards before opening fire. Anti-tank guns positioned in the rubble, 75mm PaK-40s that can penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at this range. The first American tank explodes, hit in the ammunition storage. The crew never knew what killed them. The second tank takes a hit to the tracks, immobilizes, but the crew survives. The third tank, Abrams's command tank, fires directly at the muzzle flash from the German anti-tank gun and scores a hit. The German gun goes silent. But now the infantry with Panzerfausts are emerging from cellars and rubble, and the close-quarters battle everyone feared begins. Company C, 53rd Armored Infantry, dismounts under fire and assaults into Chaumont's streets. The training pays off now. Squad leaders know their jobs. Riflemen and BAR gunners provide covering fire. Bangalore torpedoes blast through walls when doors are too dangerous. Grenades clear rooms, and the tanks, unable to maneuver in the narrow streets, provide fire support from the edge of town. Their machine guns sweeping the upper floors of buildings where German snipers might hide. It's brutal, close-range urban combat where luck matters as much as skill. An American sergeant dies turning a corner into a German machine gun. A German squad surrenders when a Sherman 75mm gun knocks down the entire wall they were hiding behind. 9 o'clock. Chaumont is in American hands. The entire engagement lasted 2.5 hours, from first shot to final clearance. By the standards of World War II urban combat, it's lightning fast. By the standards of what Abrams wants to accomplish, it's agonizingly slow. The butcher's bill comes in quickly. 6 tanks destroyed, another 8 damaged but recoverable, 40 casualties including 8 dead, and they've advanced less than 3 miles. The mathematics are brutal. At this rate, with similar resistance at each village, the column will be destroyed before reaching Bastogne. Something has to change, or the entire relief operation fails despite Abrams's aggressive tactics. But Abrams notices something in the after-action assessment. The German defense, fierce as it was, came from prepared positions within the village. The approaches were less heavily defended. The Germans concentrated their forces in the towns, leaving the space between more lightly held. It's a defensive strategy that makes sense. Maximize the advantages of prepared positions, conserve limited forces by defending key terrain instead of trying to defend everywhere. And it suggests a different approach. What if the American column stops trying to clear villages and instead bypasses them? What if they identify which villages actually block the route and which can be simply driven past? The infantry can mop up later. The tanks need to keep moving. 10 o'clock. The column reorganizes in Chaumont, while casualties are evacuated and damaged tanks assessed. Abrams holds another hasty conference with his company commanders. They agree, the next phase will bypass wherever possible. Villages on the line of advance get suppressed with fire, but not assaulted unless absolutely necessary. Speed is more important than thoroughness. It's a radical decision that leaves German forces in the American rear, but Abrams gambles that speed forward matters more than security behind. Besides, combat commands A and B are still advancing on parallel routes, clearing German positions systematically. The 37th Tank Battalion doesn't need to fight the whole German army, it just needs to punch through to Bastogne. 11 o'clock. The column departs Chaumont, heading toward Bougainville, the next objective. They leave behind a platoon of infantry to hold the village, maintain the supply line, and await the main body of CCR that's following the breakthrough. The rest push north. 40 tanks, though the number is really 34 operational after casualties and mechanical breakdowns. 150 infantry, down from 200. And every man in the column understands that they're now committed. They can't retreat because German forces are reforming behind them. They can't stop because Bastogne is running out of time. The only way is forward. The assault on Chaumont proved that Abrams's tactics can work, but it also proved they're going to pay a terrible price for every mile gained. With still 12 miles to Bastogne, the question becomes whether they have enough men and tanks to sustain this rate of casualties and still accomplish the mission. The answer, in brutally honest military terms, is probably not, but they're going to try anyway. December 26th, 11 o'clock in the morning. The German commanders finally understand what's happening. For 3 days, they've faced aggressive but conventional American attacks from the south. Combat commands A and B, methodically clearing villages, advancing across a broad front, strong but predictable. The kind of attack you can defend against with limited forces if you choose your positions carefully. Then Abrams's column punches through at Chaumont, and suddenly the German defensive calculus changes. Reconnaissance units report American armor bypassing prepared defenses, moving fast toward Bougainville, clearly aimed at Bastogne. The threat is obvious. If this American spearhead reaches the surrounded garrison, the siege breaks. And if the siege breaks, the entire German offensive in this sector unravels because so many forces are tied down containing Bastogne. General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps responsible for Bastogne's encirclement, receives the reports at his headquarters. He's a veteran panzer commander who led armored formations on the Eastern Front where the stakes were total and the fighting was merciless. He recognizes immediately what the Americans are attempting, and he understands his options are limited. His best forces are committed to assaults on Bastogne itself, trying to crack the perimeter before relief arrives. But he has some mobile reserves. Elements of Panzerlehr, still formidable despite their losses in Normandy, and the Führer Grenadier Brigade, fresh troops with high morale and adequate equipment. Von Lüttwitz makes the only decision available: counterattack, not against Abrams's spearhead, which is moving too fast to catch, but against its supply line. Cut the American column off from reinforcement and resupply, and it dies on its own. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Abrams's column takes Bougainville in a running fight that costs 2 more tanks and 20 casualties, but achieves the objective in under an hour. The village sits on a small plateau with decent visibility in all directions, and from here the lead tankers can actually see terrain they recognize from maps as being near Bastogne. They're close, maybe 6 miles from the perimeter. The knowledge energizes the exhausted crews. 6 miles, a few more hours, maybe by nightfall, they'll link up with the 101st. But as they're reorganizing in Bougainville, preparing to continue the advance, word comes from the rear that changes everything. The Arlon Road is under attack. The Arlon Road, the single paved highway connecting the 4th Armored's assembly area south of Arlon to the advance units now fighting near Bougainville, is the spearhead's lifeline. Fuel trucks travel this road, ammunition convoys, medical evacuation vehicles carrying wounded back to the aid stations, and now, at multiple points along its length, German armor and infantry are attacking across it, trying to sever the connection. The units under attack are rear echelon forces, supply troops and headquarters personnel, not frontline combat troops. They're fighting desperately with whatever weapons they have, but they're not equipped or trained for this kind of defense. Abrams receives the reports and faces the fundamental dilemma of any breakthrough operation: continue forward or pause to secure the rear. Military doctrine is clear. Never outrun your logistics. Never leave enemy forces threatening your supply line. Always maintain a secure line of communication. But military doctrine doesn't account for 11,000 men in Bastogne who need relief now, not tomorrow, not when the supply line is perfectly secure. Abrams makes his decision in under a minute. The 37th Tank Battalion continues north. Combat Command A will detach units to defend the Arlon Road. The breakthrough cannot stop. Not now. Not when they're this close. 3 o'clock. The German counterattack against the Arlon Road intensifies. Panzer Lehr's surviving tanks, perhaps 15 to 20 operational, engage American supply vehicles near Remy-Champagne. The Führer Grenadier Brigade's infantry attack across the road in multiple places, using the broken terrain to infiltrate close before assaulting. American units cobble together defensive positions from whatever they can find. Overturned trucks, hastily dug foxholes, farm buildings converted to strongpoints, and Combat Command A, still engaged with German forces to the west, tries to disengage elements and redirect them to protect the supply line. It's a nightmare of command and control, with units fighting in multiple directions, supply lines threatened, and the entire relief operation balanced on a knife edge. The German plan is sound. Isolate the American spearhead, destroy it in detail, then counterattack south to restore the defensive line. If it succeeds, Abrams's column becomes a stranded task force deep in German-held territory, with no supplies, no reinforcements, and no escape route. The tanks run out of fuel in hours, not days, ammunition exhausts in sustained combat, and the column, immobilized and surrounded, faces destruction. Von Lüttwitz commits everything he can spare to making this happen, because if he stops this relief attempt, he buys time for other German forces to crack Bastogne's defenses. And if Bastogne falls despite the relief column nearby, American morale suffers a devastating blow. 5 o'clock. Daylight fading. Temperature dropping. Abrams' column is strung out over 6 miles of hostile territory, from Bougainville north to positions approaching Assenois. Behind them, the Arlon Road is contested across its entire length. Supply trucks that tried to bring forward fuel and ammunition are burning wrecks or turned back. The wounded from Chaumont and Bougainville can't be evacuated because the route isn't secure, and the maintenance vehicles that should be recovering damaged tanks are stuck south of the combat zone, unable to move forward. The logisticians, those unsung heroes who make operations possible, are fighting for their own survival instead of supporting the advance. Abrams's radioman hands him a message from CCR headquarters. Combat Command A has detached a tank company and infantry battalion to secure the Arlon Road, but they won't be in position before nightfall, until dawn at the earliest, The supply line is cut. Abrams has what's in his tanks and carried by his men, nothing more. Fuel status across the battalion, maybe 4 hours of combat operations, less if there's significant maneuvering. Ammunition, adequate for one sustained engagement. After that, the tanks become pillboxes. The message asks Abrams if he wants to hold position until the supply situation is resolved. His reply is 3 words: continuing the attack. The decision to continue despite the severed supply line is either the boldest or most foolish choice Abrams makes in his career. His defenders will argue that stopping plays into German hands gives them time to reinforce Bastogne, maybe even time to collapse Bastogne's defenses before relief arrives. His critics will note that he risked an entire battalion on a gamble that logistics could catch up before combat attrition paralyzed his force. But in the moment, at 5 o'clock on December 26th, with daylight fading and Bastogne still under siege, Abrams doesn't think about his career or military theory. He thinks about 18,000 men surrounded in Bastogne, running out of everything, waiting for help, and he decides that help arrives tonight, regardless of cost. The column moves out from Bougainville as darkness falls. Ahead lies Bastogne, the last village before Bastogne's perimeter. And between Bastogne and Relief lies everything the Germans can throw at them. The irony of the situation isn't lost on anyone. The Americans are attempting a breakthrough using speed and aggression, classic blitzkrieg tactics. The Germans are attempting a counterattack against American supply lines, equally classic response. Both sides are executing doctrines they've practiced and refined through 5 years of war. The question becomes which doctrine, applied by exhausted forces in terrible conditions, will break first. For the men of the 37th Tank Battalion rolling north through gathering darkness, the answer has to be, not us. Not today. Not when we're this close. December 26th, 7:30 at night. The decision to attack in darkness is unprecedented and possibly insane. Armored forces don't fight at night. The doctrine is explicit. Tank attacks require daylight for observation, target identification, and coordination between supporting arms. Night attacks are for infantry with specific objectives, not for armor attempting a breakthrough. But Abrams, studying his map by red-lensed flashlight in a freezing command post in Bougainville, calculates that conventional doctrine is going to get 18,000 men killed in Bastogne. 4 miles separate his lead tanks from the southern edge of the 101st's perimeter, 4 miles through Bastogne and the broken terrain beyond. In daylight tomorrow, those 4 miles might take all day, maybe longer if German reinforcements arrive. But tonight, right now, there's a window. The Germans counterattacking his supply line have committed their mobile reserves. The defenses ahead are whatever was already in place. Attack now, in darkness, and maybe surprise compensates for all the disadvantages. The challenges of night armored operations are profound and obvious to everyone except, apparently, Abrams. Tank drivers navigate by compass and memory, unable to see terrain features. Gunners can't identify targets beyond a few hundred yards. Infantry supporting the tanks can't see to shoot effectively. Coordination becomes nearly impossible when units can't see each other. And the most dangerous threat to tanks, infantry with Panzerfausts at close range, becomes exponentially more dangerous when the tankers can't see the infantrymen approaching. Every tactical manual written by every army says, "Don't do this." Abrams says, "We're doing it anyway." 8 o'clock, the column departs Bougainville. 32 operational tanks, the number declining with each engagement. 120 infantry, down from the original 200. No artillery support because the guns can't see to adjust fire. Limited radio communication because everyone's maintaining noise discipline. And leading the column, in the command tank with its distinctive long-range radio antenna that marks it as a high-value target, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams navigates by compass and instinct. The route to Bastogne runs along a ridge road, with open fields on either side. Tactically, it's terrible. Silhouettes the advancing column against the sky, offers no concealment, and gives defenders perfect fields of fire. But it's also the fastest route, and speed is the only advantage they have. The temperature has dropped into the teens. Exposed metal burns skin. The tankers, buttoned up inside their Shermans for protection, endure a different kind of cold as frigid air seeps through every hatch and vision port. The infantry, still riding the engine decks, huddle against the warmth, and pray the column doesn't hit a mine or ambush because they'll be thrown off and crushed under the following tanks. Everyone's running on coffee, amphetamines issued by the medics, and sheer determination. Sleep is a memory, hot food is a fantasy, warmth is what you steal from tank engines. This is combat at its most elemental. Exhausted men and worn machines pushing beyond normal limits because failure means friends die. 10 o'clock. Contact. The lead tank reports German positions ahead, maybe 1,000 yards. Can't see details in the darkness, just shadows moving. Maybe infantry, maybe anti-tank guns, maybe nothing. The column halts. Abrams moves forward in his tank to assess. He can't see anything definitive, just the dark mass of buildings that intelligence says is Assenois. Doctrine says halt, wait for dawn, conduct reconnaissance. But waiting gives the Germans all night to reinforce, to prepare, to call in those forces currently attacking his supply line. Abrams makes another impossible decision. They'll assault Assenois now, in complete darkness, using a technique he's improvising based on desperation and limited options. Tank destroyers move to the front of the column. These are M10 tank destroyers, open-topped vehicles with 3-inch guns primarily designed for anti-tank work. But they have one feature that makes them useful tonight. They can mount searchlights. The plan is brutally simple. Tank destroyers illuminate targets with searchlights. Shermans behind them engage the illuminated targets, and the column keeps moving. It's essentially the opposite of tactical surprise, announcing your presence with searchlights while attacking. But it works because the German defenders, blinded by the lights, can't see the tanks behind them, and the Sherman gunners, even with limited visibility, can shoot at anything the searchlight reveals. Midnight. The assault on Assenois begins with searchlights splitting the darkness. The effect is surreal and terrifying for everyone involved. German defenders, dug in around the village, suddenly face blinding light and incoming fire from tanks they can't see. They shoot at the searchlights, killing some tank destroyer crews. But the Shermans behind keep firing. Buildings ignite from high explosive rounds. The night becomes a chaos of light and shadow, sound and fury, with no clear front line and no safe space. Infantry from both sides fight in the darkness between buildings, sometimes literally stumbling into each other before shooting. And through it all, the American column keeps moving. 1 o'clock in the morning, December 27th. Assenois is in American hands. The cost: 5 more tanks destroyed, another 30 casualties, and ammunition expenditure that leaves most tanks with less than 20 main gun rounds remaining. Normal operations planning assumes a tank carries 71 rounds and expends maybe 15 in a day's combat. Abrams's tanks have been fighting continuously for over 20 hours and are approaching Winchester, the tanker's term for being completely out of ammunition, but they're through Assenois. 1 mile remains to Bastogne's perimeter. 1 mile across open ground that's probably defended, definitely dangerous, and has to be crossed before the Germans recover from the night assault and counterattack. The column reorganizes north of Assenois with brutal efficiency, born from desperation. Fuel is redistributed from tanks that are damaged to tanks that are still operational. Ammunition is likewise consolidated. The wounded are collected in whatever vehicles can carry them, and crews from destroyed tanks are reassigned to other vehicles, replacing casualties, maintaining crew strength even as the number of operational tanks declines. The 37th Tank Battalion, which crossed the line of departure with 53 tanks 36 hours ago, now has 25 operational. Half the battalion is gone. But the survivors are 1 mile from Bastogne. 3 o'clock. False dawn begins to gray the eastern sky. Abrams orders the final advance. No preparation, no reconnaissance. Just the remaining tanks rolling north toward where the maps show the 101st Airborne's perimeter. Radio operators try to establish contact with the surrounded garrison. Warn them that friendly armor is approaching. But the radios aren't cooperating. Static, interference, dead batteries. The communications that worked flawlessly in training are failing when it matters most. So the column advances blind, hoping the defenders in Bastogne will recognize Shermans as friendly before shooting. 4:30. The lead tank crests a small rise and the crew sees foxholes ahead. American foxholes, you can tell by the rectangular shape and the way they're positioned. Soldiers in those foxholes hear the tanks approaching and do exactly what soldiers in foxholes do when they hear tanks. They prepare to fire. The lead tank commander, a sergeant who's been awake for 2 days, has the presence of mind to pop his hatch, expose himself completely, and wave an American flag he's carried for exactly this moment. The soldiers in the foxholes, surrounded for 6 days, see the flag and understand. They start cheering. The sound spreads across the perimeter like wildfire. The relief column has arrived. 4:50, December 27th, 1944. The siege of Bastogne is broken. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, standing in the turret of his command tank, shakes hands with a lieutenant from the 101st Airborne who can't quite believe what he's seeing. Behind Abrams, 25 shot-up Sherman tanks and 100 exhausted infantrymen represent what's left of the relief force. Around them, artillery fire continues because the Germans aren't conceding anything. The corridor connecting the 4th Armored to Bastogne is maybe 250 yards wide, barely the width of a road, and German forces occupy ground on both sides. The siege is broken, but the battle is far from over. Still, for this moment, this hour before dawn on December 27th, the impossible has been accomplished. An armored column attacked 22 miles through prepared defenses in winter and broke through to relieve a surrounded garrison. It cost half the attacking force. It required tactics that violated every principle of armored warfare. And it worked because sometimes, in war, the impossible is just barely possible. December 27th, 4:51 in the morning. The handshake that changes everything. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, covered in grime and cordite residue, exhausted beyond any normal meaning of the word, extends his hand to a captain from the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The captain, who's been surrounded for 6 days and thought relief was days away at best, grips that hand like it's the most important thing he's ever touched. Behind Abrams, his tankers are already redistributing ammunition and fuel, preparing for the counterattacks everyone knows are coming. Around them, soldiers of the 101st Airborne emerge from positions they've held since December 20th, and the looks on their faces tell a story that after-action reports will never capture. Relief, exhaustion, pride that they held, and a kind of stunned disbelief that the 4th Armored actually made it. The corridor connecting Abrams's tanks to the 4th Armored's main body south of Bastogne is so narrow that German observers can see across it, maybe 250 yards at the widest point. Single rifle shot width in places, supply vehicles trying to run this gauntlet will face machine gun and mortar fire from both sides. Wounded who need evacuation must take that risk or die in Bastogne, and the Germans, stunned by the night breakthrough but not defeated, are already maneuvering units to cut this tenuous connection. The siege is broken in theory but persists in practice. Bastogne remains surrounded except for this one narrow corridor that could close at any moment. 5:30. Dawn arrives properly, revealing the situation's full grimness. German positions on the ridges overlooking the corridor are close enough that riflemen can engage American vehicles. Artillery observers have perfect observation and immediately begin calling fire missions. The first supply convoy attempting to enter Bastogne takes casualties before traveling 100 yards. Trucks burn. Drivers are killed or wounded. The convoy halts, unable to proceed, effectively blocking the road for vehicles behind. Engineers rush forward with dozers to clear the wrecks, working under direct fire. This is the reality of the relief. They've reached Bastogne but haven't truly opened a supply line. Major General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding the surrounded garrison, meets with Abrams and CCR's commander to coordinate operations. The meeting happens in a cellar that served as the 101st's headquarters, and it's telling that they meet underground because the surface is too dangerous. McAuliffe's first question: "How much supply did you bring?" Abrams's answer: "What we carried on the tanks. Everything else is stuck south of Bastogne." McAuliffe absorbs this information without visible reaction because he's been commanding surrounded troops for 6 days and has learned to accept bad news without flinching. They discuss priorities: ammunition first, then medical supplies, then food, fuel if possible, and they need casualty evacuation because the aid stations in Bastogne are overwhelmed. The 101st has 2,000 casualties. Wounded men in various stages of medical care, from immediate surgical cases to walking wounded who've remained in the line because there's nowhere to evacuate them. The 4th Armored brought vehicles that can serve as ambulances, but getting wounded through the corridor under fire is going to cost lives among medics and drivers. They calculate acceptable losses. Acceptable, as if there's an accounting system where you can balance dead medics against saved wounded. But that's command in combat, making impossible choices with inadequate information and accepting responsibility for the consequences. 7 o'clock. The weather clears completely for the first time in days. Blue skies, visibility unlimited. American P-47s appear overhead, and for the first time since the battle began, the defenders in Bastogne hear friendly aircraft in numbers. The psychological impact is profound. For 6 days they've been surrounded, isolated, fighting alone. Now they see proof that the rest of the army remembers they exist and is fighting to help. The P-47s attack German positions around the corridor, dropping bombs and strafing with 50 caliber machine guns. But the Luftwaffe appears too, German fighters that have been grounded by weather now rising to contest control of the air. Dogfights develop overhead while soldiers on the ground fight their own battles. The German response to the breakthrough is immediate and multifaceted. Artillery fire intensifies across the entire perimeter, trying to disrupt American consolidation. Infantry attacks probe the corridor from both sides, seeking weak points, and German commanders begin shifting forces from other sectors, preparing major counterattacks intended to cut the corridor and re-isolate Bastogne. The most dangerous moment of the entire relief operation might not be the breakthrough, but the next few hours when the corridor is most vulnerable and German forces are still capable of organized response. Combat Command R, following Abrams's breakthrough, fights its way through Assenois and begins expanding the corridor. They attack east and west, pushing German forces back from the immediate vicinity of the road. Every yard gained makes the corridor slightly more secure, slightly less lethal for supply vehicles. But the resistance is fierce because the Germans understand what's at stake. If they can't cut the corridor, if they can't reduce Bastogne quickly, then their entire offensive in this sector fails. They've invested 6 days of siege, suffered thousands of casualties, and committed forces they desperately need elsewhere. Failure to take Bastogne or cut the relief force represents strategic disaster. Noon. The first supply convoy successfully transits the corridor, delivering ammunition and medical supplies to the 101st supply points. The trucks that make it through are shot up, windshields shattered, some vehicles leaking fluids, but they made it. The drivers, most of them kids in their early 20s from quartermaster units who enlisted to drive trucks not to fight battles, have just done something remarkably brave. They drove through a corridor under direct fire because the infantry in Bastogne needed supplies. The army will give some of them Bronze Stars for this. It's not enough recognition, but recognition rarely is. The wounded evacuation begins that afternoon. Litters loaded onto any vehicle with space. Jeeps, trucks, even tanks with wounded strapped to the engine decks because there's no other option. The convoy heads south through the corridor, drivers flooring the accelerators, medics trying to stabilize patients while vehicles bounce over rough roads at dangerous speeds. German gunners target the convoy because they're fighting a total war and don't honor Red Crosses or ambulance markings. Some wounded die in the evacuation, killed by the fire they survived inside Bastogne. Others make it to the aid stations south of Arlon, where surgeons can perform the operations that save lives. War contains no poetry adequate to describe these choices. The corridor on December 27th is simultaneously a victory and an ongoing crisis. The siege is broken but not ended. Supply is possible but not secure. Reinforcement can occur but at continuous cost. And the battle for Bastogne, which was supposed to end with the relief, actually intensifies because now both sides commit everything to either holding or cutting this narrow connection. In the week following December 27th, more casualties occur fighting for the corridor than occurred in the initial siege. The 4th Armored loses another 500 men. The 101st continues to take casualties. German losses mount into the thousands, all for a corridor barely wide enough to drive a truck through. But the corridor holds. Through December 28th, 29th, 30th. Through New Year's Eve and into 1945. Engineers widen it. Infantry secure the flanks. Artillery suppresses German positions. And slowly, inevitably, American logistical superiority asserts itself. More supplies enter Bastogne. More reinforcements. More ammunition. The garrison that was on the edge of collapse on December 26th is rebuilding strength by early January. The Germans, having failed to take Bastogne when it was isolated and failing to cut the relief corridor, begin withdrawing forces for use elsewhere. The crisis passes. The corridor becomes a road, becomes a highway, becomes just another supply route marked on maps. But in late December, when Abrams's tanks first entered Bastogne, and the corridor was measured in yards, not miles, the entire outcome of the bulge depended on whether that narrow connection could be maintained. It could. It was. And that makes all the difference. December 27th, morning. The aid station in Assenois is overwhelmed. Medics work on tables that are just doors laid across sawhorses. The wounded lie on litters covering every square foot of floor space. Plasma bottles hang from nails driven into wooden beams, and the surgeons, working by lantern light because the electric generator keeps failing, perform triage by walking among the wounded and deciding who might survive surgery and who's too far gone. This is battlefield medicine at its rawest. Save who you can, comfort who you can't, and never stop moving because more casualties arrive every few minutes. The trucks and half-tracks pulling up outside carry wounded from Chaumont, Bigonville, Assenois, and Bastogne. American wounded. German wounded. Nobody cares about nationality when arterial bleeding needs clamping. The casualty figures from the 4th Armored's relief operation are staggering when compiled. December 22nd through December 26th. Over 1,000 casualties. Killed, wounded, and missing. Though missing in this kind of intense combat usually means killed. But the body was unrecoverable or unidentifiable. The division went into battle with roughly 11,000 men. Lost 10% in 4 days. Some units suffered disproportionately. The 37th Tank Battalion started with 700 men and 53 tanks, ended with 400 men and 25 operational tanks. 50% officer casualties. Tank crew losses exceed 40%. These aren't statistics. They're empty chairs in mess tents, bunks that nobody sleeps in, friends who were alive on December 21st and dead by December 26th. The comparison to earlier operations is what makes these losses so shocking. During the 30-day breakout after D-Day, when the 4th Armored fought across France liberating town after town, they suffered roughly 800 casualties total. 30 days, 800 casualties. The Relief of Bastogne, 4 days, 1,000 casualties. The intensity of combat increased by an order of magnitude. The explanation is simple. Attacking prepared defenses in winter against determined opponents costs more than exploiting breakthroughs against disorganized retreat. But understanding why doesn't make the loss easier to accept for the platoon sergeants writing letters to the families of dead privates. The specific unit costs tell individual stories of extraordinary sacrifice. Company C, 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion. The infantry company that rode Abrams's tanks through the breakthrough started with 180 men, 70 casualties in 4 days, nearly 40%. B Company, 37th Tank Battalion, lost 6 of its 14 tanks and 32 of its 70 men. The assault on Chaumont alone cost the equivalent of an entire company, and these numbers don't capture the psychological casualties, the men who survived physically, but broke mentally from sustained combat without rest. Equipment losses run parallel to human casualties. 30 Sherman tanks destroyed. Not damaged, but destroyed beyond field repair. 15 half-tracks, countless trucks, jeeps, tank destroyers. The maintenance companies work miracles recovering and repairing what they can. But some things can't be fixed in the field. A tank with its turret blown off needs factory-level rebuild. A half-track that burned doesn't get welded back together. The Army's solution is brutally pragmatic. Salvage what's repairable, abandon what's not, and bring forward replacement equipment. Within a week of the relief, replacement Shermans arrive by rail, fresh from American factories, ready to replace the losses. Industrial capacity compensating for combat attrition, but some losses can't be replaced by factories. Lieutenant Morrison, who led the assault into Chaumont and took a Panzerfaust to the chest. Sergeant Williams, tank commander, burned when his Sherman brewed up outside Aseno. Corporal Jackson, infantry squad leader, killed by artillery during the approach to Bastogne. Private Henderson, tank driver, died when his tank hit a mine. These men, and hundreds like them, possessed experience and skill accumulated through months of combat. The replacements arriving to fill the gaps are fresh from training, competent but inexperienced, lacking the intangible understanding that comes only from surviving battles. Rebuilding unit cohesion after losses like this takes weeks, sometimes months. The non-battle casualties complicate the picture further. 200 cases of frostbite, severe enough to require evacuation. Men losing fingers, toes, sometimes entire extremities to cold injuries because they couldn't maintain adequate warmth during continuous combat operations. Trench foot from days in wet boots without opportunity to dry them. Combat exhaustion, the term they use instead of shell shock or PTSD, affects dozens more. Men who functioned fine through Normandy and the race across France but break during the Bastogne relief because everyone has a limit, and these 4 days exceeded it. The medics treat what they can and evacuate the rest, but psychological casualties don't heal as cleanly as physical wounds. December 28th, Graves registration units begin recovery operations. The job is exactly as grim as it sounds: locating bodies, identifying them if possible, recording the circumstances, and preparing them for burial. Winter complicates everything because bodies freeze in their death positions. Tank crews burned beyond recognition require dental records for identification. Men killed by artillery sometimes can't be found completely because the explosive effects scatter remains. The Graves registration soldiers do this work with professionalism and respect because someone has to, and their service deserves recognition even though nobody wants to think about what they actually do. The letters begin that same day. Company commanders writing to parents, wives, siblings of the men who died under their command. The letters follow a painful formula. Your son, husband, brother died serving his country. He died bravely. He didn't suffer. His sacrifice will be remembered. Sometimes these things are true. Sometimes they're necessary lies told to spare families the actual details of violent death in combat. A tank crew that burned probably suffered terribly. An artillery strike might have killed instantly, or might have left a man conscious and dying slowly. The commanders write what provides comfort, not what happened. The question that haunts the survivors is whether the cost was worth it. 1,000 casualties to relieve 18,000 surrounded troops. The mathematics favor the operation. Save 18,000 at cost of 1,000. But mathematics don't account for the face you remember. The friend who's gone. The specific absence that no strategic calculation justifies. The men of the 4th Armored know intellectually that the relief was necessary and successful, but knowing doesn't erase the memory of tanks burning, infantry cut down, friends who were laughing on December 21st and dead by December 26th, and the operation isn't finished. The corridor needs holding. German counterattacks continue. More casualties accumulate daily through the end of December and into January. By the time the Battle of the Bulge finally ends in mid-January, the 4th Armored will have suffered another 1,000 casualties fighting for ground they already bled to take. The relief of Bastogne was the climactic moment, but the battle afterward is the grinding reality. And through all of it, the division maintains effectiveness, continues operations, and accomplishes missions because that's what infantry and tankers do. They complete the mission regardless of cost and deal with the trauma afterward, if there is an afterward. The butcher's bill for Bastogne exceeds 1,000 names. The bill for the entire Bulge approaches 3,000. And every one of those names represents someone who won't see 1945 spring, won't celebrate victory in Europe, won't come home. They bought the relief of Bastogne with their lives. The garrison was saved, the victory was real. But the price, when you know the names and faces, seems almost too much to bear. December 20th, 1944. The realization arrives gradually, then all at once. We're surrounded. The soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division, rush to Bastogne from reserves in France, spend December 19th digging foxholes and establishing defensive positions around a town most of them couldn't find on a map 2 days earlier. They're elite troops, veterans of Normandy and Market Garden. But even elite troops prefer not to be surrounded. By nightfall on the 20th, German forces have closed the ring completely. Radio operators in the division's headquarters listen to American units trying to break through from outside, their signals fading as the units are destroyed or forced back. And in the command post, a cellar beneath a Belgian barracks, officers conduct inventory of supplies with the sinking realization that mathematics dictates everything now. Food, enough for roughly 10 days at full rations. But full rations means 3 meals a day. Hot food, adequate nutrition. The men can survive longer on less, which means stretching supplies by cutting rations, 2 meals daily instead of 3, half portions instead of full, coffee without sugar, hard crackers instead of bread. The cooks perform miracles with minimal ingredients, but there's only so much you can do when the larder is finite and resupply isn't coming. By December 23rd, the rations are down to 1 meal daily. By December 25th, wounded get priority because they need nutrition to heal. The unwounded eat what's left. Ammunition presents a more immediate crisis. Artillery, the primary defensive weapon against German armor and infantry assaults, depends on a steady supply of shells. The division's 3 artillery battalions have roughly 10,000 rounds on December 20th. Sounds like a lot until you calculate expenditure rates. A serious German attack requires 1,000-round preparations to break up the assault before it reaches American lines. 10 attacks means 10,000 rounds. The division could face 10 serious attacks easily in a week-long siege. The artillery commanders begin rationing fire missions immediately. Only fire when targets are confirmed and significant. No harassing fire, no preemptive bombardment. Make every shell count because they can't waste any. Medical supplies run critically low almost immediately. The division's medical units, designed to treat casualties and evacuate them to rear-area hospitals, suddenly must provide definitive care because evacuation isn't possible. Plasma for blood volume replacement, limited supply, morphine for pain management, ration to those in most need. Bandages get washed and reused. Surgical instruments sterilized between patients as best they can, and the surgeons, operating in cellars and basements with inadequate light and equipment, perform procedures they'd refuse to attempt in normal circumstances because the choice is attempt surgery or watch the patient die. December 22nd. The German surrender demand arrives. A formal document, delivered under flag of truce, written in English, demanding the American garrison's surrender to avoid annihilation. The German commander promises honorable treatment as prisoners of war, warns that continued resistance will result in the garrison's destruction, gives the Americans 2 hours to decide. The document gets passed to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander while the actual commanding general is elsewhere. McAuliffe reads it, thinks briefly, and replies with a word that will enter American military folklore: nuts. The reply confuses the German officers who receive it, because nuts doesn't translate well, and they're not sure if it's acceptance or refusal. The American officer delivering the message clarifies helpfully. It means go to hell. The exchange is almost comical, except it's happening during a siege where thousands of lives hang in the balance. But McAuliffe's response, when it spreads through the American lines, provides exactly what the defenders need: confirmation that their commander isn't considering surrender, that they're going to fight regardless of circumstances, that morale matters more than mathematics. Nuts becomes a rallying cry, a one-word summary of American defiance. December 23rd. The weather clears. For the first time since the siege began, aircraft can operate, and suddenly the sky fills with C-47 transports, 2-engine workhorses of the Army Air Force, flying resupply missions to Bastogne. The Pathfinders, paratroopers who jumped into Bastogne early in the siege to mark drop zones, guide the aircraft in with colored panels and smoke, and the supplies come tumbling out. Artillery ammunition, medical supplies, rations, everything wrapped in parachutes that bloom across the sky like strange flowers. Not all of them land inside the perimeter. Some drift into German-held territory, becoming gifts to the enemy. but enough land where needed to give the defenders hope. The aerial resupply, December 23rd through 26th, delivers 241 tons of supplies. It's barely adequate but enough to extend the garrison's endurance. The artillery commanders can shoot at German attacks again. The surgeons receive fresh medical supplies. The troops get something resembling food, and morale improves dramatically, because seeing friendly aircraft overhead proves the garrison hasn't been forgotten. The Air Force crews flying these missions deserve recognition that often gets overlooked. Flying low and slow over contested territory, vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, performing precision drops into small zones, they're as critical to Bastogne's defense as the troops on the perimeter. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The heaviest German assault yet strikes the northwestern sector of the perimeter. Elements of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division attack with armor support, trying to crack the American lines before relief arrives. The fighting is savage. German tanks penetrate American positions. Infantry fight hand-to-hand in foxholes. Artillery from both sides turns the battlefield into hell, and the Americans hold. Barely. The line bends. Platoons get overrun. Companies fall back to secondary positions. But the line doesn't break. By nightfall, the German attack has failed with heavy losses on both sides, and the perimeter holds. The cost of Christmas Eve's fighting: 300 casualties, pushing Bastogne's total wounded over 2,000. The aid stations, already overwhelmed, now face impossible triage decisions. Who gets surgery? Who gets morphine? Who gets laid in a corner with a blanket because there's nothing more they can do? The medical personnel, doctors and medics and nurses who volunteered or were drafted into medical service, work beyond exhaustion because stopping means men die. They save who they can, and they remember forever the ones they couldn't save. December 25th, Christmas Day. Services are held in cellars and foxholes, abbreviated prayers for men who might not survive to see another Christmas. The few chaplains present move through the perimeter, offering comfort, performing last rites, writing letters for wounded who can't write themselves. And everyone listens to the sound of the artillery, hoping it means American forces are approaching, fearing it means another German attack is coming. The siege has lasted 5 days, feels like 5 years. The question on everyone's mind: how much longer can we hold? The answer arrives December 26th at 4:50 in the morning. Tanks. American tanks approaching from the south. The word spreads through the perimeter faster than radio. Relief is here. Men who've been fighting in isolation for 6 days emerge from their foxholes to see Sherman tanks, shot up and worn but unmistakably American, rolling through the perimeter. The sound that rises from 18,000 throats isn't quite cheering, more like a collective exhale. Release of tension held too long. They held. Relief arrived. The siege is over. But victory comes with the realization of what the siege cost. 2,000 wounded, hundreds killed, ammunition nearly exhausted, food almost gone, and the knowledge that if the relief had arrived 24 hours later, maybe 48, the outcome might have been different. The garrison held because they believed relief was possible. If that belief had faded, if despair had set in, the defenses might have collapsed. The 4th Armored arrived just in time, not comfortably early, not with room to spare, just in time. And the men inside Bastogne understand what that means. They survived by the narrowest possible margin. That understanding, the knowledge of how close they came to annihilation, stays with them. The survivors of Bastogne carry that memory the rest of their lives. We held because someone was coming to help, and they did come. They kept the promise. And that matters more than words can express. December 22nd, 1944. General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz faces the problem he's dreaded. From his headquarters controlling the 47th Panzer Corps, von Luttwitz watches American Third Army pivot north with the speed and efficiency that makes German commanders grudgingly respect their enemy's operational capability. He's a veteran of the Eastern Front, where the stakes were total and the fighting merciless, and he recognizes immediately what Patton's movement means. The American relief effort is real. It's coming, and von Luttwitz's forces, stretched thin around Bastogne's perimeter, and committed to offensive operations further west, probably can't stop it. The mathematics are brutally simple. You can't attack in one direction while defending in another without adequate reserves, and the German army in December 1944 doesn't have adequate reserves for anything. The forces available to von Lüttwitz for blocking the American relief are impressive on paper. The 5th Parachute Division, experienced infantry, well led, defending from prepared positions. Elements of Panzerlehr, a division that was elite in Normandy, still formidable despite losses. The Führer Grenadier Brigade, fresh troops with good equipment and high morale. Against a conventional attack, these forces could probably hold for weeks. But the American approach isn't conventional. The 4th Armored's reputation precedes them. They don't attack methodically, they break through aggressively, and von Lüttwitz's intelligence officers warn him that this particular division, commanded by Patton's most aggressive subordinates, will do things by-the-book commanders would consider suicidal. December 23. Von Lüttwitz requests permission to pull forces from other sectors to reinforce the southern approaches to Bastogne. The request travels up the chain of command to General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, who sympathizes but can't help von Manteuffel's own offensive operations, driving west toward the Meuse River, are faltering. American resistance stiffens. German supply lines stretch dangerously long, and the entire Ardennes offensive, Hitler's master plan for splitting the Allies and buying Germany time, is beginning to look like a catastrophic miscalculation. Von Manteuffel can't spare forces for defensive operations because he's fully committed to attacks that are failing anyway. The strategic dilemma facing German commanders in late December 1944 is that they're executing Hitler's plan without believing it can succeed. The Führer, isolated in his headquarters and increasingly detached from battlefield reality, insists the offensive continue toward Antwerp. His generals, reading situation reports that show limited fuel, mounting casualties, and stiffening American resistance, understand the offensive has already failed. But military dictatorships don't operate on consensus. Hitler's orders remain: take Bastogne, continue west, reach the Meuse. So von Lüttwitz and von Manteuffel try to accomplish impossible missions with inadequate resources while the Americans throw fresh divisions into the fight. December 24. German intelligence correctly identifies the 4th Armored Division's approach route and likely objectives. The reports reaching von Lüttwitz's headquarters are accurate, detailed, and profoundly depressing. The Americans are advancing faster than predicted. Their casualties are lower than expected, and their aggressiveness suggests they're willing to accept risks German doctrine would reject. Von Lüttwitz positions his available forces as well as possible. 5th Parachute Division in the villages along the likely approach. Panzerlehr held in reserve for counterattacks. Führer Grenadier Brigade preparing to cut American supply lines once the relief column advances beyond support. The German plan is sound. Allow the Americans to penetrate, then cut off their spearhead and destroy it in detail. It's classic mobile defense, the kind of operation German officers study at Staff College and execute brilliantly when they have resources. But execution requires mobile reserves, adequate fuel for counterattacks, and room to maneuver. In late December 44, with German logistics collapsing and American air power dominating clear skies, mobile defense becomes theoretical exercise divorced from practical reality. Von Lüttwitz issues orders, knowing they probably can't be fully executed. But orders must be issued because the alternative is admitting the situation is hopeless. December 26. The German counterattack against the American supply line achieves initial surprise and tactical success. Panzerlehr's tanks cut the Arlon Road in multiple places. Infantry overruns American supply units. And for several hours von Lüttwitz allows himself to believe the plan might work. If they can isolate the American spearhead, if they can hold the corridor closed for 24 hours, the relief attempt fails. But the Americans adapt faster than expected. Combat Command A redirects forces to secure the supply line. American tank destroyers knock out German armor, and by nightfall, the counterattack has stalled with heavy German losses and minimal strategic gain. The assault on Assenois, when it happens in darkness on December 26, catches German defenders completely unprepared. Night armored attacks aren't in anyone's doctrine. The Germans didn't expect it. They didn't plan for it. And when American tanks equipped with searchlights come smashing through defensive positions in complete darkness, German resistance collapses faster than daylight assaults would have achieved. Von Lüttwitz receives reports that Assenois has fallen and understands immediately what it means. The relief has succeeded. He can counterattack the corridor, can make the Americans pay for every yard, can extend the battle, but he can't restore the siege. Bastogne is relieved. The German casualties around Bastogne through December, approximate 8,000 killed, wounded and missing. 8,000 from divisions that can't replace losses easily. Panzer Lehr, which landed in Normandy with full strength, is now a shadow of its former capability. The 5th Parachute Division suffered 30% casualties. The Führer Grenadier Brigade, committed piecemeal, accomplished nothing significant, despite its ideological fervor, and German equipment losses, particularly armor, can't be replaced because German factories are being bombed and fuel for transporting new equipment doesn't exist. Every tank lost at Bastogne is gone permanently. The strategic implications of Bastogne's relief extend far beyond one town. The German offensive required capturing Bastogne to use its road network for moving supplies and reinforcements west. Without Bastogne, the supply situation becomes impossible. German armor runs out of fuel. Infantry divisions can't be sustained, and the entire offensive, already behind schedule, grinds to a halt. By early January, German forces are withdrawing from the Bulge, abandoning equipment, retreating toward the Siegfried Line. Hitler's last major offensive in the West has failed, and while many factors contributed to that failure, Bastogne's successful defense and relief stands as the decisive moment when German hopes collapsed. Von Lüttwitz, writing his post-battle report in early January, struggles to explain how the relief succeeded despite his force's best efforts. He notes American material superiority, their aggressive doctrine, their willingness to accept casualties. But what troubles him most is the operational tempo. The Americans moved faster than German planning anticipated. They adapted more quickly than German doctrine allowed, and they sustained offensive operations despite losses that should have forced them to halt and reorganize. Von Lüttwitz concludes that American military capability in late 1944 exceeds German capability, not because American soldiers are better individually, but because American systems, logistics, and doctrine enable sustained operations that Germany can no longer match. The German generals, those who survive the war, will spend years debating Bastogne in their memoirs and histories. Could they have taken it before relief arrived? Probably. If forces had been committed earlier, could they have stopped the relief? Possibly. If Hitler had allowed mobile defense instead of insisting on continued offense. But the counterfactuals, the what-ifs and might-have-beens, are ultimately meaningless. What happened is what happened. Bastogne held, the 4th Armored relieved it, and the German offensive failed. The German view of these events, recorded in their reports and histories, acknowledges American success while noting their own limitations. And those limitations, fuel shortages, personnel losses, strategic overextension, will only worsen as 1945 progresses. Bastogne didn't end Germany's war, but it marked the beginning of the end when German armies could no longer achieve operational objectives against American forces that controlled the air, dominated logistics, and fought with the confidence that comes from knowing your side is winning. December 27th, 10 o'clock in the morning. The first German counterattack hits the corridor with unexpected violence. Infantry from the 5th Parachute Division, supported by a handful of remaining tanks, assault across the narrow corridor connecting the 4th Armored to Bastogne. Their objective is simple: cut the road, isolate the relief force, and restore the siege. American defenders, hastily positioned along the corridor's edges, fight desperately to hold ground they bled to take. The battle develops into the kind of close-quarters infantry action that tanks and artillery can't easily influence. Foxhole to foxhole, building to building. Men with rifles and grenades killing each other at ranges measured in yards. And the corridor, that precious 250-yard-wide connection, becomes contested ground again. The pattern established on December 27th repeats daily through the end of December. German attack. American defense. Casualties on both sides and the corridor holding by ever narrower margins. The defenders along the corridor aren't frontline combat troops exclusively. They're whoever can be spared. Headquarters personnel, supply troops, maintenance soldiers, anyone who can fire a rifle. The cooks and clerks of the 4th Armored Division find themselves in foxholes trading shots with German paratroopers. This is total war at battalion level, where the distinction between combat and support troops disappears because everyone fights or everyone dies. December 28th. A supply convoy, attempting to enter Bastogne, is ambushed inside the corridor. German machine guns positioned on the overlooking ridges have perfect fields of fire onto the road. The convoy, 10 trucks carrying ammunition and rations, takes casualties before the first truck travels 50 yards. Drivers die at their wheels. Vehicles swerve off the road. The convoy halts, effectively blocking the route for everything behind it. Engineers race forward under fire with a bulldozer to clear the road, shoving wrecked trucks aside while German gunners try to kill the bulldozer operator. The operator survives. The convoy eventually gets through, but 3 trucks and 8 men don't make it. The engineering effort to widen the corridor proceeds under constant fire. Bulldozers and graders work to create alternate routes so one disabled vehicle can't close the entire supply line. Mines need clearing because the Germans seeded the area with anti-tank and anti-personnel mines before they were pushed back. And infantry must advance to secure ground far enough from the road that German observers can't direct accurate fire. Every yard gain costs casualties. By December 30th, the corridor has widened from 250 yards to maybe 500. Still dangerously narrow, but marginally less lethal. The American artillery, particularly the 105th mm howitzer battalions supporting the 4th Armored, fires continuously during this period. German formations concentrating for counterattacks get broken up by preparatory fires. German observation posts get plastered when American counter-battery radar locates them, and German supply routes behind their lines get interdicted by long-range harassing fire. The artillery expenditure is enormous, tens of thousands of rounds in a week. But the guns prevent German counterattacks from organizing effectively, buying time for the corridor's defenders to consolidate. December 30th. The wounded evacuation continues. By now, over 4,000 casualties have been evacuated from Bastogne through the corridor. Each evacuation convoy risks ambush. Medical vehicles get targeted despite the Geneva Convention because the Germans, fighting a losing battle against superior forces, have abandoned some niceties. American medics adopt the pragmatic solution, evacuate wounded in tanks or armored vehicles instead of clearly marked ambulances. It's safer, though it means wounded endure a rougher ride, and it works. The evacuation proceeds. The surgical hospitals south of Arlon receive continuous streams of wounded. The surgeons work without pause, 20-hour shifts, sleeping when they can't stand anymore. The American reinforcements flowing into Bastogne through the corridor transform the garrison's situation from desperate to sustainable. Fresh infantry divisions arrive to relieve the exhausted 101st Airborne. Artillery units position themselves in the town and begin counter-battery fires. Tank destroyer battalions bring their anti-tank capability inside the perimeter. And supplies, those life-sustaining supplies, ammunition and fuel and rations and medicine, flow steadily despite German interdiction efforts. By early January, Bastogne is no longer a besieged garrison. It's a fortress, heavily defended, well supplied, and growing stronger daily. January 1st, 1945, New Year's Day. The corridor has widened to approximately 2 miles. German forces still occupy ground within artillery range, but they're no longer capable of cutting the corridor. Their attacks continue. Smaller now, company-size raids instead of battalion assaults, nuisance rather than existential threat. The American defenders, having held for 6 days of continuous combat, begin rotating units out of the line for rest, and the supplies flow uninterrupted for the first time since December 26th. The crisis has passed. The cost of holding the corridor exceeds anything the 4th Armored experienced during the initial relief. 500 casualties December 27th through January 1st. That's in addition to the 1,000 casualties suffered December 22nd through 26th. 1,500 total casualties, roughly 15% of the division's strength in 11 days. Some units suffer disproportionately. The infantry battalions, bearing the weight of corridor defense, lose nearly half their strength. Company commanders become platoon commanders as casualties thin the ranks. Platoon sergeants command companies. Corporals lead squads that should be led by sergeants. The division functions through the competence of junior leaders and the resilience of individual soldiers who keep fighting despite exhaustion. The question haunting everyone is, was holding the corridor worth the cost? The alternative was abandoning Bastogne after relieving it, pulling back to more defensible positions, and accepting that the garrison would be besieged again. Militarily, that might have made sense. Strategically, it would have been disaster. The propaganda value of relieving Bastogne, only to abandon it again, would have devastated American morale and validated German claims that their offensive was succeeding. So the corridor held, the casualties were accepted, and Bastogne remained in American hands, becoming a symbol of American determination that persists decades later. The final accounting of the corridor battle can't be measured purely in casualties or ground held. The German forces committed to attacking the corridor were forces unavailable for offensive operations elsewhere. Every German soldier killed or wounded defending against the relief was a soldier not available for the drive toward the Meuse, and every day the Americans held the corridor was a day the German offensive lost momentum, until finally, inevitably, it stalled completely. The Battle of the Bulge didn't end at Bastogne, but Bastogne's relief and the successful defense of the corridor marked the moment when German success became impossible and American victory became inevitable. By mid-January, when the Bulge is finally eliminated and American forces return to offensive operations, the corridor through Assenois is just another road marked on maps. The desperate fighting of late December fades into division histories and after-action reports. But the men who held that corridor remember. They remember friends who died defending 250 yards of snow-covered ground. They remember the cold, the fear, the exhaustion, and they remember that they held because someone decided this ground mattered enough to die for. Whether that decision was right or wrong, wise or wasteful, the survivors can't judge. They just know they did their job. They held the line. And sometimes in war, that's all you can ask. December 28, 1944. Allied intelligence completes its assessment. The German offensive has failed. The analysts at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, poring over reconnaissance reports and prisoner interrogations and captured documents, reach conclusions that will shape the war's final months. Germany's last major offensive in the West achieved surprise, initial success, and significant Allied casualties, but it accomplished none of its strategic objectives. Antwerp remains in Allied hands. The British and American armies remain united, and the German forces committed to the offensive suffered losses they cannot replace. The Battle of the Bulge, while dramatic and costly, ultimately amounts to Germany accelerating its own defeat. The mathematics of the strategic situation are brutally simple. Germany committed approximately 200,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces to the Ardennes offensive. By late December, they've suffered roughly 100,000 casualties, lost half their armor, and exhausted fuel reserves that took months to accumulate. In exchange, they've delayed Allied offensives by perhaps 6 weeks and inflicted 80,000 Allied casualties. The trade isn't favorable because the Allies can replace losses and Germany cannot. American factories produce thousands of tanks monthly. German factories under constant aerial bombardment struggle to produce hundreds. The fuel situation exposes Germany's critical vulnerability. The entire Ardennes offensive was planned around capturing Allied fuel dumps because German forces lacked sufficient fuel to reach their objectives otherwise. But the offensive failed to capture significant fuel stocks. German tanks, advancing deep into Allied territory, began running out of fuel and were abandoned. Entire divisions became immobile not from combat losses but from empty fuel tanks. By early January, German mechanized forces are withdrawing on foot, leaving their vehicles behind because fuel for organized retreat doesn't exist. Bastogne's role in this strategic failure is central. The town's road network was essential for German logistics. Capturing it would have enabled supply convoys to support the western drive toward the Meuse. But the 101st Airborne held, the 4th Armored relieved them, and the Germans never controlled Bastogne's roads. Without those roads, German supply lines stretched impossibly long over inadequate routes. Supplies couldn't reach forward units. Ammunition ran short, food became scarce, and the offensive, starved of logistics, withered despite the combat troops' determination. The Relief of Bastogne, specifically the 4th Armored's breakthrough, represents more than tactical success. It demonstrates American operational capability that Germany can no longer match. The Third Army pivoted 90 degrees in 72 hours. The 4th Armored attacked 22 miles through defended terrain in 4 days, and American logistics supported continuous operations despite winter weather and German interdiction. This operational tempo, sustaining offensive action despite obstacles, characterizes American warfare in 1945. The Germans fight skillfully at tactical level, but lose operationally because they can't match American logistical capacity and operational flexibility. January 16, 1945. American forces eliminate the Bulge completely. Third Army attacking from the south meets First Army attacking from the north at Houffalize, Belgium. The salient created by the German offensive no longer exists. German forces withdraw to their original start lines, having gained nothing and lost everything. Hitler's gamble failed catastrophically, and the Western Allies, having absorbed and defeated Germany's last major offensive, prepare for the final drive into Germany proper. The strategic implications extend beyond the Western Front. The Ardennes offensive consumed German strategic reserves that might have defended against the Soviet winter offensive in the east. By early January, Soviet forces launch massive attacks across the entire Eastern Front. German units exhausted from the Ardennes and lacking reinforcements because those reserves were destroyed in Belgium collapse. The Soviet advance accelerates. By April, Soviet forces will be fighting in Berlin while Western allies cross the Rhine. Germany's decision to attack in the West enabled the East's collapse. Churchill, addressing Parliament in early January, explains the Bulge's significance. Germany spent its last strength achieving nothing while the Allies, though bloodied, remained capable of sustained offensive operations. The battle delayed the end of the war by weeks, perhaps 2 months, but it made the end more certain by destroying German forces that might have prolonged resistance. In brutal terms, the Bulge killed Germans faster than defensive operations would have, thereby shortening the war despite the delay it imposed. The economic analysis is equally stark. Germany's war production in December 1944 was a fraction of 1942's output due to bombing and lost territory. Fuel production particularly suffered as Allied bombers targeted synthetic fuel plants. The Ardennes offensive consumed 6 months of accumulated fuel reserves in 3 weeks. After the Bulge, German mechanized operations become nearly impossible not from lack of vehicles but from lack of fuel to operate them. The Wehrmacht, that once formidable force that conquered Europe, becomes an increasingly infantry-bound army walking toward defeat. American production, by contrast, accelerates through 1944 into 1945. The factories build tanks faster, continue 2:23 p.m., then combat destroys them. Ammunition production exceeds expenditure, and the logistical infrastructure, that unglamorous network of trucks and trains and supply depots, delivers everything forward units need to maintain operations. The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated this capacity. Despite initial surprise and heavy casualties, American supply lines maintained the forces that counterattacked and eliminated the salient. Germany achieved operational surprise but couldn't exploit it strategically, because American logistics absorbed the shock and continued functioning. The lesson senior commanders draw from Bastogne specifically is that aggressive armor operations properly supported can achieve breakthroughs even against prepared defenses. Patton's pivot and the 4th Armored's relief operation become case studies for mechanized warfare's potential. The Germans demonstrated blitzkrieg's principles in Poland and France. The Americans perfected them in conditions the Germans couldn't match. Winter, against prepared defenses with logistics supporting sustained operations. This operational art, combining aggressive tactics with superior logistics, characterizes American military operations through Germany's final collapse. The strategic equation in late December 44, analyzed from documents available today, shows Germany fighting a war it cannot win against opponents it cannot match. The Ardennes offensive was Hitler's last attempt to change the strategic situation through operational brilliance. It failed because operational brilliance cannot overcome strategic bankruptcy. Germany lacked the fuel, the replacements, the industrial capacity, and the time to achieve its objectives. The Allies had all of these in abundance, and Bastogne, that small Belgian town, became the point where this strategic reality expressed itself most clearly. Germany committed everything to taking it, failed, and in failing, demonstrated that the war was lost. December 12, 1944. 4 days before the German offensive begins. The moment that makes everything possible. Colonel Oskar Koch, Third Army's intelligence officer, briefs General Patton on disturbing patterns in German radio traffic and troop movements. Koch is good at his job, cautious in his assessments, and worried about what he's seeing. German divisions moving into the Ardennes, radio traffic increasing, reconnaissance activity along quiet sectors. It doesn't prove an offensive is coming, but it suggests the possibility. Most intelligence officers at Supreme Headquarters dismiss these warnings. Koch doesn't, and Patton, trusting his intelligence officer over the optimistic consensus, orders his staff to plan for contingencies. This decision, made 4 days before the need becomes apparent, is what makes the 72-hour pivot possible. The contingency planning happens in relative secrecy because nobody wants to appear paranoid when senior commanders are confidently predicting Germany's imminent collapse. But Patton's staff conducts the exercise. If Germans attack north through the Ardennes, how does Third Army respond? They identify road networks, designate movement tables, allocate military police units for traffic control. And when Eisenhower calls on December 19 asking when Patton can attack, the plan already exists. It's not sketched on paper during the meeting. It's detailed, rehearsed, and ready to execute. The 4-day head start is what transforms the impossible into the merely difficult. The logistics infrastructure supporting the relief operation represents years of American investment in unglamorous but essential capabilities. The Red Ball Express, that famous truck convoy system that sustained operations after the Normandy breakout, evolved into a comprehensive logistics network by December. Third Army has 89 truck companies, roughly 40,000 vehicles dedicated to supply operations. These aren't combat vehicles. They're 2.5-ton cargo trucks driven by soldiers whose job is moving supplies forward. The 4th Armored's attack consumes thousands of gallons of fuel, tons of ammunition, and vast quantities of every supply category. The trucks deliver it all. American industrial capacity, specifically the ability to replace losses faster than combat creates them, provides the foundation for sustained operations. Sherman tank production in December 1944 exceeds 2,000 units. German tank production is under 400. An American armored division that loses 30 tanks can receive replacements within a week. A German panzer division that loses 30 tanks rarely receives replacements at all. This production differential means American forces can accept higher casualty rates because losses are temporary. German losses are permanent. The 4th Armored suffers 50% tank losses during the relief, but returns to full strength by mid-January. Panzer Lehr never recovers. The Combat Command System, that organizational innovation that divides American armored divisions into flexible task forces, proves essential to the relief operation. Abrams's Spearhead is essentially Combat Command Reserve configured for breakthrough operations. Heavy on tanks, adequate infantry, artillery on call, and engineers for obstacle clearing. This task organization, creating combined arms teams at battalion level instead of only at division level, allows rapid adaptation to changing situations. When Abrams needs to bypass villages instead of clearing them, he reorganizes his task force immediately. German divisions, with their more rigid organizational structures, struggle to adapt as quickly. Training matters. The 4th Armored Division formed in April 1941, trained for 18 months before deploying to Europe, and accumulated 5 months of combat experience before Bastogne. That experience, accumulated through success and failure, creates institutional knowledge that manifests in combat effectiveness. Tank crews know their vehicles, infantry knows their weapons, Commanders understand their subordinates' capabilities. This familiarity, built through shared experience, makes complex operations possible because everyone understands their role without extensive briefing. Leadership proves critical at every level. Patton's aggressive vision enables the Third Army pivot. Gaffey's operational direction focuses the Fourth Armored's efforts. Abrams's tactical brilliance designs the breakthrough. But equally important are the hundreds of junior officers, lieutenants, and captains who execute plans despite exhaustion and casualties. And the non-commissioned officers, sergeants who keep units functioning when officers are killed, whose technical expertise and steady leadership holds units together. The relief succeeds because leadership functions at all levels, not just at the top. The American personnel replacement system, though imperfect, keeps units functional despite casualties. Fresh soldiers arrive from training camps in the States, process through replacement depots in Europe, and join units as needed. The replacements lack combat experience, which creates temporary effectiveness reductions, but they maintain unit strength. German divisions, suffering similar casualties, can't replace losses because Germany's manpower pool is exhausted. By late December 44, German units fight at 50% strength with no replacements available. American units maintain 80 to 90% strength through continuous replacement flow. Communication infrastructure, specifically the ability to coordinate operations across hundreds of miles, relies on technology and organization developed throughout the war. Radio networks, telephone lines, and messenger services maintain communication between headquarters and forward units. When radio fails, telephone works. When telephone is cut, messengers provide backup. This redundancy ensures that even in chaotic conditions, commanders maintain situational awareness and can issue orders. The German communication system, more dependent on telephone lines that Allied artillery cuts, struggles to maintain coordination during fluid operations. Air superiority, achieved through years of bomber offensive and fighter production, provides crucial support once weather clears on December 23. American P-47s attack German positions, interdict supply routes, and provide reconnaissance. German forces, accustomed to operating under Allied air superiority, dig in and disperse when skies clear. The Luftwaffe appears occasionally, but can't challenge Allied air dominance. This air superiority doesn't win the battle directly, but constrains German options significantly. Forces that must hide during daylight lose operational flexibility. The question of what made the relief possible has no single answer. Leadership mattered. Logistics mattered. Training, doctrine, industrial capacity, air superiority, all contributed. Remove any single element, and the operation probably fails. Patton without logistics couldn't execute the pivot. Abrams without industrial capacity to replace losses couldn't sustain the breakthrough. Good doctrine without trained soldiers couldn't be implemented. This convergence of favorable factors, none sufficient alone but all necessary together, is what made the impossible possible. And the Germans, lacking many of these factors by December 44, couldn't match American operational capability despite their soldiers' skill and determination. The lesson, if there is one, is that military operations at this scale depend on systems, not just heroes. The individual bravery of tankers attacking a Senway matters, but it's enabled by logistics officers who delivered fuel, maintenance, soldiers who kept tanks running, planners who designed feasible operations, and industrial workers who built replacement equipment. The Relief of Bastogne required thousands of people doing their jobs competently under difficult conditions. That's less dramatic than stories of individual heroism, but more truthful to how modern warfare actually functions. The heroes deserve honor, but the system that enabled their heroism deserves recognition too. January 3, 1945. The 4th Armored Division finally rotates out of line for rest and refitting. 11 days since they jumped off toward Bastogne. 11 days of continuous combat without pause, without relief, without the rest that doctrinal manuals say units require after major engagements. The soldiers who stumble into the rest area are barely recognizable as the force that departed Arlon on December 22. They're filthy, exhausted, and haunted by faces they'll never see again. The cooks prepare hot food, the supply sergeants distribute clean clothing, And the medical personnel check everyone for frostbite and combat exhaustion, because after 11 days in winter combat, those injuries are nearly universal. The replacement soldiers arrive within days. Fresh from training, eager or terrified depending on personality, they fill the gaps left by casualties. The veterans receive them with mixed feelings. Relief that the unit is back to strength, resentment that replacements don't understand what the unit endured, and pity, because these green soldiers will learn what combat means soon enough. The platoon sergeants and squad leaders, the experienced NCOs who survived, begin the patient work of integrating new soldiers and rebuilding unit cohesion, shattered by casualty rates that exceeded normal expectations. February through April 1945, the 4th Armored leads 3rd Army across Germany. They cross the Rhine in March, the first American armored units to do so in the 3rd Army sector. They drive through what remains of German resistance, advancing faster than supply lines can sustain, liberating towns whose populations cheer and surrender simultaneously. But the combat tempo remains high. Germany is collapsing, but collapsing armies still fight. The 4th Armored suffers another 2,000 casualties between January and May, replacing losses continuously, maintaining operations despite turnover that would cripple units with less institutional cohesion. April 12, 1945. The 4th Armored Division liberates Ohrdruf, a Nazi concentration camp. What they find there defies description in official reports. The soldiers, hardened by months of combat, are unprepared for the evidence of industrial genocide. Eisenhower visits Ohrdruf personally days later, insisting that as many soldiers as possible see what they're fighting against. The 4th Armored soldiers, who questioned whether the war's cost was justified, find their answer in Ohrdruf's horrors. This is why it mattered. This is what they were stopping. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The 4th Armored Division is in Czechoslovakia, having driven deeper into Europe than almost any Allied formation. The war ends not with dramatic final battles, but with surrenders, abandoned vehicles, and German soldiers desperate to surrender to Americans rather than Soviets. The division has traveled from Normandy to Czechoslovakia, roughly 1,200 miles in 11 months. They've liberated hundreds of towns, destroyed dozens of German formations, and lost over 7,000 men killed, wounded, and missing. 7,000 casualties from a division that numbered 11,000 at full strength. They've essentially replaced themselves completely, absorbed losses equal to original strength, and continued operating through casualty rates that would destroy less capable formations. The men who survive carry Bastogne with them, though they rarely speak of it. The tankers remember friends who burned. The infantry remember cold that felt like dying, and everyone remembers the fear that they wouldn't make it, that the relief would fail, that their sacrifice would be meaningless. But they did make it. The relief succeeded, and Bastogne endures as proof that impossible things sometimes happen when enough people decide to make them possible. Creighton Abrams returns to the United States as a hero, though he'd reject that description. He stays in the Army, rising steadily through ranks that recognize his competence and combat record. Colonel, General. Eventually, General Creighton Abrams becomes Army Chief of Staff during Vietnam, where his experience from World War II shapes his approach to an entirely different war. The M1 Abrams tank, America's main battle tank from the 1980s through present day, carries his name. But Abrams himself, until his death in 1974, deflects credit to the soldiers he commanded. They did the impossible, he'd say. I just pointed them in the right direction. The veterans form the 4th Armored Division Association after the war, gathering annually to remember what they endured together. The reunions are boisterous and melancholy simultaneously. Old men laughing about shared experiences, then falling silent when someone mentions a name that brings back memories too painful to discuss. The association persists through the 1970s, 80s, 90s, as the veterans age and their numbers dwindle. The final reunion happens in 2016, when membership falls too low to sustain the organization. The World War II generation is dying. Their stories die with them, unless someone records them first. The psychological cost of Bastogne's relief is never properly calculated. Post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't recognized in 1945. Combat exhaustion was treated as temporary condition, remedied by rest. But many veterans carry the trauma lifelong. Nightmares, startle responses, inability to discuss the war with families who don't understand. Some function successfully, building careers and families while managing their trauma privately. Others struggle, turning to alcohol or isolation, their suffering unrecognized by a society that expects warriors to return unaffected by war. The question survivors ask, though rarely aloud, is whether their sacrifice mattered. Did relieving Bastogne change the war's outcome? Could Germany have won if Bastogne fell? The historical consensus is yes. The relief mattered, but the survivors wonder if their specific contribution justified its cost. They lost friends, endured horrors, gave years of their lives to a campaign that ended in victory, but left them scarred. The reassurance that their sacrifice was necessary provides cold comfort when memories wake them at 3 a.m. What the 4th Armored accomplished during the Bastogne relief transcends tactical success. They proved that American forces, properly led and supplied, could accomplish operational objectives that doctrine said were impossible. They demonstrated that aggressive tactics, though costly, could succeed where cautious approaches failed, and they showed that ordinary soldiers, not superhumans but regular people from every background America contains, could achieve extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. These lessons, learned in blood and cold and fear, shaped American military doctrine for decades afterward. The memorial at Bastogne, the Martisson Memorial, dedicated in 1950, honors the American units that fought there. The 4th Armored is listed among them, though their sacrifice often gets overshadowed by the 101st Airborne's defense. But the soldiers who held the corridor, who bled for every mile of the relief, deserve recognition equal to those who held the perimeter. Both were necessary, both were heroic, and both paid prices that peacetime generations struggle to comprehend. The memorial stands as reminder that freedom, that abstract concept politicians reference and citizens take for granted, was purchased with specific lives in specific places. Bastogne is one of those places. The 4th Armored paid part of that purchase price, and their payment should be remembered as long as the benefits persist. Today, Bastogne is a peaceful town of 15,000 people in southern Belgium. Tourists walk the streets where tanks fought. The Martisson Memorial, star-shaped and imposing, overlooks terrain the 4th Armored crossed under fire. And the museums, the Bastogne War Museum and others, tell the story with artifacts and exhibits that can't quite capture what it felt like to be there in December '44. The snow is gone. The fear is gone. What remains is memory, growing more distant as the veterans die and their children age, and eventually there will be no living connection to those December days when the outcome wasn't certain, and men died for ground that's now a parking lot. Military professionals still study the relief of Bastogne at staff colleges worldwide. The operation demonstrates principles that remain relevant despite technological change. Speed matters. Logistics enable operations. Aggressive leadership at multiple levels amplifies capability. And accepting risk, calculated risk but risk nonetheless, sometimes achieves results that caution cannot. Officers planning modern operations reference Bastogne when discussing relief operations, breakthrough tactics, or the challenges of winter warfare. The lessons from 70 years ago remain applicable because human factors, leadership and courage and determination, don't change even when weapons do. The debate among historians continues. Was the relief inevitable given Allied advantages, or was it genuinely extraordinary achievement? One school argues that American material superiority made success likely, regardless of tactics. Patton could have used any division and achieved relief eventually. The opposing view holds that specific factors, Abrams's leadership, the 4th Armored's capabilities, the aggressive doctrine, were necessary for success in the time available. Remove these factors and the relief fails or arrives too late. The truth probably lies between these poles. Advantages made success possible, but execution made it actual. Contemporary military operations occasionally reference Bastogne as shorthand for desperate relief attempts. When surrounded forces need rescue and time is limited, Planners invoke Bastogne as precedent for what's achievable. But they also note the costs. 1,500 casualties in 11 days, 50% tank losses, casualty rates that would trigger investigations in modern all-volunteer forces. Bastogne succeeded, but at prices contemporary military culture might find unacceptable. This creates tension between historical example and current operational reality. The M1 Abrams tank, named for Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, entered service in 1980. It's arguably the world's best main battle tank, combining firepower, protection, and mobility in a package that's dominated battlefields from Iraq to Afghanistan. Tankers who crew Abrams tanks learn about their namesake, the aggressive lieutenant colonel who led from the front at Bastogne. The connection between past and present, between the Shermans of '44 and the Abrams of today, reminds soldiers that their service connects to traditions established by those who served before. The 4th Armored Division itself no longer exists as active formation. It was inactivated in various reorganizations after World War II, briefly reactivated, and finally retired as Army structure changed. But its lineage and honors are preserved, and some current units trace their heritage to the World War II division. This organizational continuity, maintaining links to historical units despite personnel turnover and structural change, helps preserve institutional memory and traditions that define military culture. The last World War II veterans are dying now, in their 90s and 100s, taking their memories with them. Historians record what they can, conducting interviews, preserving letters, digitizing photographs, but there's no substitute for living memory, for asking questions and receiving answers from someone who was there. When the last veteran dies, probably within the next decade, the connection to Bastogne becomes purely historical. We'll have documents and artifacts, but not witnesses. The transition from memory to history is inevitable and profoundly sad. What Bastogne represents, in the broader narrative of World War II, is a moment when outcome was uncertain and individuals mattered. The war's end was probably inevitable by December '44. Germany couldn't win. But the timeline, the casualties, the human cost, none of that was predetermined. The 4th Armored's Relief of Bastogne didn't change whether the Allies won. It changed when they won and what that victory cost. And for the individuals involved, the soldiers who lived or died based on whether relief arrived in time, the distinction matters absolutely. The question of whether the relief was worth its cost admits no objective answer. Strategically, yes, absolutely worth it. The propaganda value, the morale boost, the operational advantages gained, all justify the casualties from strategic perspective. But ask the widow whose husband died on December 26th if his death was worth it. Ask the mother whose son burned in a tank if strategic considerations provide comfort. The strategic calculation is cold and impersonal. The human cost is specific and devastating. Both truths coexist. The relief was necessary and successful, and it cost lives that mattered immeasurably to those who loved them. Modern soldiers visiting Bastogne often report feeling connected to those who fought there. Standing in Assounois, looking south toward where the 4th Armored approached, you can imagine the tanks advancing through darkness. The terrain hasn't changed dramatically. The distances are the same, and for a moment, if you're willing to try, you can feel the weight of what happened here. That connection, between past and present, between those who served then and serve now, is why the legacy matters. Not for academic interest, not for strategic lessons, but because the willingness to serve, to sacrifice, to attempt the impossible when ordered, that willingness connects all who've worn the uniform across all eras. The legacy of Bastogne's relief is ultimately about what's possible when people refuse to accept limitations. The staff officers who said Patton's 72-hour pivot was impossible were right. Technically, it was impossible by every normal calculation. But it happened anyway because enough people decided it would happen and worked until it did. Abrams's breakthrough was tactically unsound by doctrine. But it succeeded because doctrine isn't destiny when human will intervenes. The legacy is this: impossible tasks sometimes succeed, not through magic, not through miracles, but through competence, courage, and sheer bloody-minded determination to accomplish the mission regardless of cost. The soldiers of the 4th Armored Division who died during the relief are buried in various cemeteries across Europe and America. Their graves receive visitors occasionally, though less frequently as time passes, and those who knew them personally die. The grave markers list name, rank, dates, and perhaps Bastogne if family requested. But the markers can't contain what these men gave. They gave their futures, their unborn children, their potential careers, families, contributions to peace. They gave everything. Not abstractly but specifically. Particular lives ended on particular dates for reasons that seemed sufficient at the time. And the question remains, haunting and unanswerable, was it worth it? The historians say yes. The strategists say yes. The survivors mostly say yes. Though some nights they wonder, the families of the dead provide no consensus. And those of us born after, beneficiaries of sacrifices we didn't witness, struggle to comprehend the cost that purchased our world. Bastogne stands as reminder that freedom isn't free, that victory requires sacrifice, and that some people, when asked to do the impossible, somehow find the strength to say yes. That's the legacy. That's what endures. Not the tactics or the strategy or the equipment lists, but the human capacity to attempt the impossible and occasionally, remarkably, succeed. The story of the 4th Armored Division's Relief of Bastogne will be told as long as people study World War II. The details may fade, the names may be forgotten, but the essential truth persists. When everything seemed impossible, when the situation looked hopeless, when every rational calculation suggested failure, someone decided to try anyway, and they succeeded. Not easily, not without terrible cost, but they succeeded. And that success, purchased with blood in December 1944, echoes forward through time to today, reminding us that impossible is sometimes just another word for difficult. The soldiers who fought at Bastogne, who died in its defense and relief, deserve to be remembered not just as historical figures, but as individuals who gave everything for a cause they believed was worth that price. Whether they were right, we who inherited their victory can never fully judge. But we can honor their sacrifice by remembering it accurately, teaching it honestly, and recognizing that our world was shaped by their choices in December 44.